This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I'm still shaking as I type this. It's been 3 weeks since I got back, and I haven't slept properly since. I've debated whether to share what happened, but I need to get this out. Maybe someone can make sense of it, or at least confirm I'm not losing my mind. I'm a travel blogger, nothing fancy, just sharing my adventures online for my modest following. When I got invited to document a trip on the SS Meridian, I jumped at the chance. A luxury cruise from New York to the Mediterranean? Hell yes. The Meridian was marketed as the crown jewel of modern cruising, all marble interiors, crystal chandeliers, and the kind of opulence that makes you feel like royalty just by being there. The day we set sail was perfect. Clear skies, calm waters. I remember standing at the railing during departure, watching New York's skyline shrink into the distance, feeling that rush of excitement at the beginning of a new adventure. My cabin was gorgeous, king-sized bed, private balcony, the works. I spent the first day exploring, taking photos of everything for my blog, chatting with other passengers, and enjoying free champagne at the welcome reception. Everything was going perfectly until the second night. There was this big fancy cocktail party in the grand ballroom. Everyone dressed up, the champagne flowing. I was wearing this new black dress I'd bought specifically for the trip, chatting with an older couple from Seattle about their previous cruises. The ship's captain had just finished some speech about the journey of a lifetime when the lights flickered. Just for a second. Most people barely noticed, but something about it sent a chill down my spine. The ship's engines seemed to stutter at the same moment, a subtle change in the vibration beneath our feet that I felt more than heard. I shrugged it off as nothing, but looking back now, that was when everything started to change. After the party around midnight, I headed back to my cabin. The corridors felt different, colder. The previously cozy hallway now seemed endless, the ornate carpet patterns stretching out like some optical illusion. I remember thinking it was just the champagne making me dizzy. When I reached my cabin, the door was slightly ajar, just an inch or two. I definitely remembered closing and locking it before leaving for the party. My heart started pounding as I pushed it open, half expecting to find someone inside. The room was empty, but noticeably colder than the hallway. Nothing seemed missing or disturbed, but something felt wrong, like when you know someone's been in your space, moving things around just slightly. I checked the bathroom, under the bed, inside the closet. Nothing. But the balcony door was unlocked. I'm absolutely positive I'd locked it. The curtains billowed gently in the night air, and when I went to close it, I swear I saw something move in the darkness over the water. Not another ship or anything tangible. More like a shadow where no shadow should be. I barely slept that night, kept waking up feeling like someone was watching me. Every time the ship creaked or settled, I'd jolt awake. Around 4 in the morning, I heard what sounded like scratching at my door, but when I finally worked up the courage to look through the peephole, there was nothing there. The next morning, everything went to hell. I went up to the breakfast buffet around 9 and immediately noticed something was off. Crew members were huddled in corners, speaking in hushed tones. More staff than usual were patrolling the decks, and they weren't smiling or greeting passengers like before. When I asked a waiter if everything was okay, he gave me this fake smile and said, "Of course, ma'am, just a small issue with the kitchen, nothing to worry about." But then I overheard 2 passengers talking about a missing woman. Apparently, Elise Warner, a 20-something traveling alone, hadn't been seen since the cocktail party. Her cabin was empty, bed unslept in. The crew was conducting a discreet search while trying not to alarm other passengers. My blogger instincts kicked in. I started paying attention, watching how the crew moved around the ship. There were definitely certain areas being patrolled more heavily, particularly the lower decks and the older part of the ship near the stern. An announcement came over the PA system asking passengers to stay in the main areas for a special event preparation, but it felt off. Around noon, I was sitting in one of the lounges pretending to read when I overheard two crew members talking. "Third one this sailing," one whispered. "Captain says to keep Section D completely sealed off now," the other replied. "What about the mirror?" "Don't even mention that thing. Just do your job and stay away from there." They noticed me and immediately shut up, walking away quickly. Section D, mirror. My heart was racing, but I knew I needed to find out what was happening. If people were genuinely disappearing, everyone needed to know. I waited until most people were at lunch, then headed toward the stern, following signs for crew areas. Most doors were keycard locked, but I noticed one emergency exit door was propped open slightly with what looked like a folded piece of paper. I slipped through into a narrow service corridor. The difference was immediate. The luxury of the passenger areas gave way to utilitarian metal walls and fluorescent lighting. It was eerily quiet except for the constant hum of the engines below. Signs on the wall pointed to different sections, and I followed the ones marked D-Wing. The temperature dropped noticeably as I went deeper. My breath started fogging in front of me, which made no sense for a climate-controlled ship. I passed several locked doors until I reached one marked Storage, Authorized Personnel Only. It was slightly ajar, a sliver of dim light spilling out. I still don't know what made me push that door open. Curiosity, stupidity, whatever force had been drawing me deeper into the ship. But I did. The room was huge, much bigger than it should have been based on the ship's layout. It looked like some kind of storage for nautical artifacts. Glass cases held old navigation instruments, faded maps, ship models. The walls were lined with display cases containing uniforms, logbooks, and photographs. But dominating the far wall was an enormous ornate mirror in a tarnished gold frame, easily 8 feet tall. Its surface was cloudy with age, reflecting the room in a murky, distorted way. Something compelled me to approach it. The closer I got, the colder the air became. I could see my reflection, ghostly and wavering, and instinctively reached out to wipe away some of the grime on its surface. The moment my fingers touched the glass, everything changed. My reflection disappeared. Instead, I was looking into what seemed like the same room, but different, busier. People in old-fashioned crew uniforms moved urgently through the space. They couldn't see me, but I could see them. Their clothes looked like they were from the 1950s or 60s. One man stood directly before the mirror, staring right through me with panicked eyes, his mouth moving as if shouting something I couldn't hear. I tried to back away, but I couldn't move. My hand felt stuck to the glass, which now seemed to have the consistency of thick syrup. To my horror, the surface began to ripple, and a hand, pale, withered, with blackened fingernails, thrust out, grabbing my wrist. It was ice cold and surprisingly strong. I could feel it pulling me toward the mirror, the glass beginning to envelop my hand like quicksand. I screamed and used all my strength to wrench myself backward. There was a sickening suction sound as my hand came free, and I fell backward onto the floor. The hand retreated into the mirror, and the surface returned to its cloudy state. I ran, sprinted back through the corridors, not caring who saw me or what they thought. Back. In my cabin, I locked the door and collapsed on the bed, hyperventilating. My wrist had a perfect handprint bruised into it, the skin frosted like it had been dipped in liquid nitrogen. Over the next hours, things only got worse. Announcements claimed the ship was experiencing minor technical difficulties that required us to change course slightly. More passengers were reported missing, not officially, but word spread quickly. I heard one crew member tell another that 7 people had vanished without a trace. I tried calling for help on my phone, but there was no signal. The ship's internet was suddenly down for maintenance. I couldn't shake the feeling we were being deliberately cut off. That night, around 11, the engines suddenly roared to life at full power. The ship lurched forward with such force that items fell from shelves. The cabin lights flickered, then went out completely, replaced by dim emergency lighting that bathed everything in an eerie red glow. I heard screaming from the hallway and peeked out to see people running in panic. One woman was sobbing that she'd seen her husband walk through a wall and disappear. An elderly man was shouting that he'd seen people in old-fashioned clothes in his bathroom mirror. I grabbed my phone, passport, and a small backpack of essentials and joined the growing crowd of terrified passengers in the hallway. We headed toward the upper decks, hoping to find crew members or lifeboats or any way off this nightmare. What we found instead was chaos. Shadows moved at the corners of my vision, humanoid shapes that vanished when I turned to look directly at them. The temperature kept dropping until we could all see our breath. Several passengers claimed they saw people they knew walking down corridors that shouldn't exist, following them only to find dead ends or empty rooms. I needed answers. While most passengers headed for the lifeboats, I broke away and ran toward the ship's archive room I'd spotted during my initial tour. It was unlocked and empty. I frantically searched through files until I found a leather-bound book marked Meridian, History, and Construction. What I read made my blood freeze. The SS Meridian wasn't just named after an earlier vessel. It was built using materials salvaged from the original Meridian, a luxury liner that disappeared without a trace in 1963. The book contained newspaper clippings about the vanishing, theories about freak storms or Soviet submarines. But tucked between the pages was a handwritten note that mentioned something called the binding ritual, performed by the ship's owner to ensure the souls remained attached to their new vessel. The last page contained a warning. The mirror must never be touched. It is the doorway they use to cross over. A massive wave hit the ship, nearly knocking me off my feet. The lights went out completely. In the darkness, I heard whispering voices all around me, speaking words I couldn't understand. When emergency lighting kicked in, I wasn't alone anymore. Standing around me were a dozen people in clothing from different eras, some in 1960s attire, others in more modern clothes, a few in what looked like crew uniforms from the original Meridian. They stared at me with hollow eyes, their skin pale and waxy. One woman stepped forward. I recognized her as Elise Warner, the first passenger reported missing. Her lips were blue, water dripping from her clothes, though she was completely dry. "It wants more," she said in a voice that echoed strangely. "It's always hungry." I ran. I've never run so fast in my life. Up to the boat deck, where a group of maybe 30 passengers and crew were frantically lowering lifeboats. The ship was now moving at impossible speed, the engines screaming in protest. Through the darkness and fog, I could see no sign of other vessels or even the horizon, just endless black water. The first mate was organizing the evacuation. When I told him what I'd found, he just nodded grimly. "It happens every few years," he said quietly. "The company covers it up, pays off families, changes records, but the ship always takes what it needs." We barely managed to get 3 lifeboats away from the Meridian. As we drifted into the darkness, I watched the massive ship continue speeding away, lights flickering wildly. For just a moment, it seemed to shimmer and change, its modern structure overlaid with the image of an older vessel. Then it vanished into the fog, the roar of its engines fading until there was nothing but silence and the gentle lapping of waves. We were rescued 12 hours later by a cargo ship. The official story is that the Meridian suffered catastrophic engine failure and sank. The company has already offered settlements to survivors in exchange for non-disclosure agreements. Most people have taken the money, but I know what I saw. And sometimes, when I look in mirrors now, I catch glimpses of faces I recognize from the ship, watching, waiting. The handprint on my wrist hasn't faded. Sometimes it feels cold, like something is still holding on to me, and in my dreams, I'm still running through those corridors, trying to escape as the Meridian sails endlessly into darkness, carrying its captive souls to whatever waits beyond the horizon. Story 2. I still can't sleep with the windows open. It's been 21 years and I still check my locks 3 times before bed. I've never shared the full story online before, but I need to get this off my chest because it's eating me alive, especially now that I'm the only one left in this town. It was the summer of 2002, right after our junior year. I was 17, and my friends and I were celebrating the start of summer break with a sleepover at Sarah's family cabin. Sarah's parents were loaded. Her dad was some big-shot lawyer in Boston, and they had this gorgeous cabin near the 100-mile wilderness section of the Appalachian Trail in Monson, Massachusetts. The cabin was their weekend getaway, but they let Sarah use it sometimes when they were away on business trips. There were 5 of us that night: me, Rachel, Sarah, Olivia, Denise, and Katie. We'd been planning this sleepover for weeks. No parents, no rules, just us girls hanging out, watching movies and talking about our plans for senior year. It was supposed to be fun. We all met up at my house around 2 in the afternoon. My mom made us sandwiches for the road, and we piled into Sarah's Jeep Cherokee. The drive to the cabin took about an hour and a half. We stopped at this rundown gas station on the outskirts of Monson to fill up and grab snacks. That's where everything started to go wrong. While Sarah was pumping gas, Olivia went inside to pay and buy drinks. The rest of us waited in the car, singing along to Avril Lavigne. After a few minutes, Olivia came rushing back to the car, her face pale. "Let's go," she said, slamming the door shut. "Now." Sarah was still filling up the tank. "What's wrong?" "These guys inside," Olivia whispered. "They were saying gross stuff to me. One of them asked where we were headed and if we wanted company." I remember looking through the gas station window and seeing them, 2 men in their 30s watching us. One was tall and skinny with a patchy beard, wearing a dirty baseball cap. The other was shorter but built like a linebacker, with a shaved head and tattoos covering his arms. They were both staring right at us, and the shorter one raised his beer can like he was toasting us. "Creeps," Denise muttered. "Just ignore them." Sarah finished pumping gas, and we got out of there as fast as we could. I remember Katie turning around in her seat and saying they weren't following us. We all laughed it off, but I had this weird feeling in my stomach that wouldn't go away. The cabin was about 20 minutes from the gas station down this winding dirt road surrounded by dense forest. It was beautiful but isolated. The nearest neighbor was at least a mile away. When we got there, the sun was still up and the cabin looked like something out of a magazine. 2 stories, huge windows, a wraparound porch, and a fire pit in the backyard. We unloaded the car, cranked up the music, and started making dinner. Sarah's parents had stocked the fridge before they left, so we had plenty of food. We made spaghetti and garlic bread and ate out on the porch watching the sunset. Everything felt normal again. We were talking about college applications and which teachers we hoped to get for senior year. After dinner, we moved inside to watch movies. Sarah's parents had this massive TV in the living room with surround sound. We decided to watch The Ring because Katie hadn't seen it yet. In hindsight, a horror movie was the last thing we needed that night. It was around 10:30 when Denise went to the kitchen to get more popcorn. I heard her call Sarah's name, her voice tight and strange. We paused the movie. "Sarah," Denise said again, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's someone looking through the kitchen window." We all froze. Sarah laughed nervously. "Very funny, Denise." "I'm not kidding," Denise insisted. "I swear to God I saw a face." Sarah got up and turned on the porch lights. We all crept into the kitchen, huddled together like penguins. The window above the sink looked out onto the back porch, but all we could see was darkness beyond the circle of porch light. "See?" "Nothing there," Sarah said, but she didn't sound convinced. We went back to the living room, but nobody was paying attention to the movie anymore. Every little noise made us jump. The wind rustling the trees, the house creaking, the ice maker in the fridge. At 11:45, the power went out. 1 second, we were sitting in the glow of the TV, and the next, we were plunged into complete darkness. The kind of darkness you only get in the woods, so thick it feels like you could touch it. "It's just a power outage," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "The breaker box is in the basement. I'll go check it." "No way," I said, grabbing her arm. "Nobody's going anywhere alone." That's when we heard it, the sound of glass breaking somewhere in the house. Katie started crying. Olivia was fumbling with her phone, trying to call 911, but there was no signal. Of course there wasn't. Sarah's parents only had a landline, which was useless without power. "The wine cellar," Sarah whispered urgently. "In the basement. My dad had it reinforced with a metal door because his collection is so expensive. We can lock ourselves in." We could hear footsteps upstairs now, heavy boots on hardwood floors, more than one person. And then a man's voice. Come out, wherever you are." It was the guys from the gas station. They must have followed us after all, waited until dark. We moved as quietly as we could toward the basement door in the hallway. Sarah led the way with the flashlight on her phone, the beam of light barely cutting through the darkness. The basement stairs creaked under our weight, and I was sure they could hear us. The wine cellar was at the back of the basement, a small room with stone walls lined with wooden racks full of bottles. The door was solid metal with a deadbolt. We all crammed inside, and Sarah locked the door behind us. We huddled together on the cold floor, trying not to make a sound. Above us, we could hear them ransacking the house, drawers being emptied, glass breaking, furniture being overturned. "They're looking for us," Olivia whispered, tears streaming down her face. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 15 minutes, the basement door opened. Heavy footsteps on the stairs. Sarah's phone had died by then, so we were sitting in complete darkness. "We know you're down here, girls," a man's voice called out. It was the taller one from the gas station. I recognized his voice. "We just want a party. Don't be rude." They tried the wine cellar door, rattling the handle. When they realized it was locked, they started pounding on it. "Open this fucking door," the second man shouted. "We can wait all night. No one's coming to help you out here." The pounding got more violent. I was sure the hinges would give way at any moment. Denise was hyperventilating. Katie was silently praying. Olivia had her arms wrapped around her knees, rocking back and forth. And then, in the distance, we heard the most beautiful sound: police sirens. The men must have heard them too, because the pounding stopped. There was a moment of silence, and then we heard them running back up the stairs. "This isn't over," one of them shouted down to us. "I'll find you one by one. I promise you that." We stayed in the wine cellar until we heard car doors slamming and engines starting. The police had arrived. Only then did Sarah unlock the door with shaking hands. The cops told us that a hiker on the Appalachian Trail had seen suspicious activity around the cabin and called it in. They arrived just as the men were fleeing in their truck. The police gave chase but lost them on the back roads. When we went upstairs, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The cabin was destroyed, every drawer emptied, every cushion slashed. They'd spray-painted obscenities on the walls, broken every mirror, poured bleach over all the food in the fridge. It wasn't just a robbery, it was personal, like they wanted to hurt us in any way they could. The police took our statements and searched the area, but they never found the men or their truck. They said these things happen sometimes in remote areas. Drifters target isolated properties. They told us we were lucky. Lucky. That word has haunted me for 21 years. Sarah's parents sold the cabin a month later. None of us ever stayed there again. After graduation, my friends all left Monson. Sarah went to UCLA, as far away as she could get. Olivia's family moved to Chicago. Denise and Katie both ended up on the East Coast for college and never came back, but I stayed. My mom got sick my freshman year of college, so I dropped out to take care of her. After she passed, I just never left. I got a job at the local library, bought a small house on the edge of town, and tried to move on with my life. Except I can't move on, because I'm the only one still here. The only one who might still be on their radar. Sometimes I see a man with a baseball cap at the grocery store, and my heart stops. Or a truck will drive by my house too slowly, and I'll lock myself in the bathroom until it passes. I've installed security cameras, motion sensor lights, extra deadbolts on every door and window. The local police chief retired years ago. The new officers don't know about what happened that night. To them, it's just another unsolved case in a folder somewhere. 3 months ago, I got a postcard in the mail. No return address, no message. Just a picture of the Appalachian Trail sign at the 100-mile wilderness. And on the back, 5 tally marks drawn in what looked like red ink. I didn't report it. Who would believe me after all this time? They'd say it was a coincidence, a random piece of mail. But I know better. I know he's out there waiting, and I know I'm the only one left for him to find. Every night, I check my locks 3 times before bed. I sleep with a baseball bat next to me, and I never, ever open my windows because he made a promise 21 years ago, and some promises, no matter how much time passes, are meant to be kept. Ankash, Story 3. I've been a lifelong resident of Helen, Georgia. Grew up hunting and hiking these mountains with my dad, and I thought I knew every inch of the Appalachian wilderness around here. But what happened 3 weeks ago has turned everything I thought I knew about these woods upside down, and I can't sleep through the night anymore without hearing those screams. It started about 6 months ago when I noticed something odd in the local paper. A hiker had gone missing in the northeastern sector of the mountains, about 15 miles from the tourist areas. No big deal, right? People get lost in these mountains all the time. But then another person vanished in the same area a month later, and another. Over the span of 2 years, 7 people had disappeared within roughly the same 5-mile radius. I got curious and started mapping the disappearances. When I marked each location on a topographical map, I noticed they formed a rough circle around an area that doesn't get much foot traffic. Too steep for casual hikers, no established trails, and honestly, nothing remarkable to see there according to official maps. Just dense forest, some rocky outcroppings, and a few small streams. The police reports were frustratingly vague. Search parties found nothing. Dogs lost scent trails at weird places. Personal belongings showed up hundreds of yards from where they should have been. One guy's backpack was found hanging from a tree branch 30 feet up, like someone had deliberately placed it there. I became a bit obsessed, I'll admit. Started spending evenings researching missing persons cases, mapping patterns, and reading through hiker forums. My girlfriend Amber thought I was losing it. Maybe I was. But something didn't add up, and I couldn't let it go. After weeks of planning, I convinced 4 friends to come with me to check out the area. Dennis and Kyle are experienced hunters who've lived here their whole lives too. Amber reluctantly agreed to come. She's an emergency nurse and the most level-headed person I know. My buddy Mike rounded out the group. He's an army vet who did 2 tours in Afghanistan and knows his way around weapons and survival situations. We weren't stupid about it. We packed for 3 days, even though we planned a day trip. Each of us carried emergency supplies, first aid kits, extra water, and food. Mike and Dennis brought their handguns, legally carried, and Kyle brought his hunting rifle. We had satellite phones, since cell service is non-existent out there, and we all wore bright orange vests so we wouldn't be mistaken for game by other hunters. We set out at 5 in the morning 3 Saturdays ago. The weather was perfect. Clear skies, around 55 degrees, light breeze. We parked at an old logging road access point and hiked about 7 miles to reach the outer edge of the area I'd mapped. The first few hours were uneventful, just a challenging hike through beautiful forest. We spotted deer, wild turkeys, and even a black bear with cubs, which we gave a wide berth. Around noon, we reached a small clearing and stopped for lunch. That's when I first felt something was off. The forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no insects, nothing. Anyone who spends time in the woods knows that's not normal. "Y'all notice how quiet it got?" Kyle whispered, glancing around. We all nodded. Mike instinctively put his hand on his holster, scanning the tree line. Could be a predator nearby. Mountain lion, maybe. We packed up quickly and continued deeper into the mapped area, sticking close together now. The terrain got rougher, with steep inclines and dense underbrush that tore at our clothes. We had to use machetes in some spots to get through the thickets. About 2 hours later, we reached what appeared to be an old game trail and decided to follow it. The trail wound through a particularly dense section of forest, then suddenly opened into another small clearing. And that's when we saw it. A cabin. not some modern vacation cabin. This was old school, hand-built from rough-hewn logs, with a metal chimney pipe sticking out of a slanted roof. No power lines, no vehicle access that I could see. Just this isolated cabin in the middle of nowhere, miles from the nearest road or trail. That's not on any map, I said, pulling out my GPS to double-check our location. We were deep in the circle I'd mapped of disappearances. Dennis raised his binoculars. Windows are covered with something from the inside, can't see in. Could be a hunting cabin, Kyle suggested. Though it's weird there's no access road. Amber grabbed my arm. Connor, I don't like this. We should head back. I was about to agree when we heard it, a muffled cry from inside the cabin. Then another, louder this time. It sounded like someone was screaming for help, but their voice was partly muffled. Mike immediately drew his pistol. That's someone in distress. We stood frozen, listening as the cries continued. Definitely human, definitely in pain or terrified. We need to check it out, I said, moving forward. Wait, Mike grabbed my shoulder. We don't know what we're walking into. Let me approach first. That's when the cabin door swung open. Two men stepped out onto the small porch. Even from 50 yards away, I could tell something was wrong with them. They were filthy, with matted hair and beards. Their clothes were tattered and stained, but it was their posture and movements that really disturbed me. Hunched, almost animal-like. One carried what looked like a machete. The other had some kind of homemade spear. They hadn't spotted us yet. We were partially concealed by the edge of the clearing and some underbrush. The screaming from inside grew louder, more desperate. A woman's voice, I think, though it was hard to tell through what sounded like a gag or something covering her mouth. Mike raised his gun. "Police!" he shouted. "Put your weapons down!" The men whipped around, spotting us. Their faces, God, I'll never forget their expressions. Not surprise or fear. They looked hungry. Their eyes were wide, bloodshot, and they smiled. Not normal smiles, but wide, tooth-bearing grins that reminded me of wolves. Dennis raised his rifle and fired a warning shot into the air. "Back off, we're armed." Instead of retreating, the men let out these high-pitched whooping noises and charged straight at us. "Run!" Mike yelled, firing a shot into the ground in front of them. We bolted back into the forest. I grabbed Amber's hand and pulled her along as we crashed through the underbrush. I could hear the men behind us still making those awful whooping calls that echoed through the trees. They were fast, unnaturally fast for people navigating dense forest. We ran for what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes. The forest blurred around us as panic took over. At some point, we hit a steep slope and half ran, half slid down it, using trees to break our fall. I lost track of Kyle and Dennis for a while, but we regrouped at the bottom of the ravine. "I think we lost them," Mike panted, scanning the hillside above us. We didn't stop to rest. We hiked at a brutal pace for 3 more hours, taking a different route back than we'd come in, staying off trails and keeping to the densest parts of the forest. It was nearly dark when we finally reached our vehicle, exhausted and scratched to hell from thorns and branches. The drive back to town was silent except for Amber quietly crying in the back seat. We went straight to the police station. The sheriff's deputy took our statements, but I could tell he didn't believe us. He called in Sheriff Williams, who I've known since I was a kid. Williams listened more carefully, taking notes and asking specific questions about the location. "We'll send a team out first thing tomorrow," he promised. "You folks go home and try to get some rest. You've had a scare, but you're safe now." The next day, Williams called me. A team of deputies had gone to the coordinates we provided and found a cabin all right, but not what we described. This one was well maintained, with solar panels, a generator, and a small ATV parked outside. The owner was a retired doctor from Atlanta who uses it as a hunting retreat. He was out of state, visiting family, and gave permission for the deputies to search the property. They found nothing unusual. "But that's impossible," I argued. "The cabin we saw was primitive, hand-built. And what about the screaming? What about those men who chased us?" Williams sighed. "Look, Connor, I've known you since you were knee-high. I don't think you're making this up, but we found nothing like what you described. No evidence of anyone living rough out there, no signs of struggle, nothing unusual at all. Dennis provided detailed descriptions of the men to a police sketch artist. When the drawings were done, Williams showed them to the forest rangers and local hunters. Nobody recognized them. The police investigation stalled out after a week. They suggested we might have gotten disoriented in the woods, that fear and exhaustion might have affected our perceptions, that maybe we heard an animal in distress and our minds filled in the rest. But all 5 of us saw the same thing, heard the same screams, and those men, those weren't normal people living off the grid. Something was deeply wrong with them. I've been back to the police station 6 times since then, bringing maps, research on the missing hikers, everything I've compiled. Each time, I get more patronizing responses. Yesterday, Williams suggested I talk to someone about trauma and anxiety. I can't let this go. Someone was in that cabin screaming for help, and now I can't sleep because I hear those screams in my dreams. I keep thinking about how we ran away instead of helping. What if someone is still there, being held captive by those people? My friends don't want to talk about it anymore. Kyle and Dennis have stopped returning my calls. Mike said he's seen enough horror in Afghanistan and doesn't need more. Amber broke up with me 3 days ago, saying my obsession with this is unhealthy. Maybe they're right. Maybe I am losing it. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. I'm going back out there this weekend, alone this time. I've bought a better GPS unit, a body camera, and enough supplies to last 4 days. I need answers. I need to know if I abandoned someone who needed help. If I don't find anything, I'll try to let this go. But if I do, well, at least I'll have evidence this time. I just hope I'm not adding my name to that list of disappearances. Story 4. I still don't sleep well at night. It's been 3 months since that call came in, and I can't shake what happened. Writing this down might help, but honestly, I'm not sure anything will. I've been on the Ravenswood police force for 7 years now, and nothing prepared me for what I encountered at 1450 Elm Street. It was a Tuesday evening in October, unseasonably cold. I remember because I'd forgotten my thermal undershirt and was regretting it during my entire shift. I was about 4 hours into my patrol when the call came through from dispatch around 9:30 in the evening. Officer Mitchell, we've got a disturbance reported at 1450 Elm Street. Neighbor called in about strange noises. Can you check it out? I acknowledged the call and headed that way. Elm Street is in the old money part of Ravenswood. You know, those massive Victorian houses with perfect lawns that nobody in town can actually afford anymore. Most of them have been split into apartments or converted to bed and breakfasts, but a few are still single-family homes. I'd driven past 1450 countless times, but never had a reason to stop there. The property stood out even among the other fancy houses. 3 stories of dark brick with a wraparound porch and those ornate gingerbread trimmings along the roofline. The kind of place kids dare each other to approach on Halloween. As I pulled up, I noticed all the exterior lights were off, but there was definitely illumination coming from inside, visible through gaps in the heavy curtains. I parked my cruiser at the curb, leaving the engine running as we typically do on routine checks. The air felt different as I stepped out, heavier somehow, and colder than it had been just blocks away. I chalked it up to the tall trees surrounding the property, blocking the streetlights and creating shadows. Protocol for a disturbance call is to approach cautiously, but without assuming danger. I walked up the stone path, noting how well maintained the garden was despite the late season. The porch steps creaked under my weight. Not unusual for an old house, but the sound seemed to echo more than it should have. I knocked firmly on the ornate wooden door, announcing myself. Ravenswood Police, is everything all right in there? No response. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. That's when I noticed the door wasn't fully latched. In a town like Ravenswood, people rarely leave their doors unlocked, especially in the nicer neighborhoods. Hello? Police officer. I'm coming in to check if everyone's okay. I pushed the door open slowly, one hand hovering near my holster. Standard procedure. The entryway was dimly lit by what looked like a small lamp in an adjacent room. The interior smelled of furniture polish and something floral, lavender maybe. It was immaculately kept, with hardwood floors that looked freshly polished and antique furniture that probably cost more than my yearly salary. "Hello? Anyone home?" Police officer conducting a welfare check. The house responded with silence, but not the comfortable kind. It was the type of silence that feels like something's holding its breath. I took a few steps further in, scanning the foyer and adjacent sitting room. Nothing seemed disturbed or out of place. No signs of a struggle or break-in. My instincts were sending mixed signals. On one hand, everything looked normal, just an empty, well-kept house. On the other hand, something felt profoundly wrong. The air inside was even colder than outside, which made no sense. I could see my breath forming little clouds. I should have called for backup then. That's what protocol dictates when entering an unsecured location. But nothing tangible justified it yet, just a feeling and an unlocked door. My supervisor would have given me hell for calling in reinforcements over a creepy vibe. I checked the ground floor methodically. Living room, dining room, kitchen, study. All empty, all pristine. No signs of disturbance whatsoever. The furniture was expensive but dated, like something from a historical society museum. Family photos lined the walls, but strangely they all seemed to be from decades ago, nothing recent that I could tell. As I moved toward the staircase, I heard it, a faint sound from upstairs, not quite footsteps, more like something being dragged very slowly across the floor. Then silence again. "This is Officer Sarah Mitchell with Ravenswood PD. Is someone up there? I need you to identify yourself." No response, but I could swear the temperature dropped another few degrees. I unholstered my weapon and started up the stairs, keeping close to the wall where the steps would creak less. Halfway up, I caught sight of light spilling from a partially open door at the end of the upstairs hallway. I reached the landing and paused, listening. The house was completely silent now, not even the normal settling sounds you'd expect from an old building. I moved slowly down the hallway, checking each room as I passed. Guest bedroom, empty. Bathroom, empty. Home office, empty. When I reached the room with light coming from it, I positioned myself to the side of the doorway and pushed it open further with my foot. It was a bedroom, master bedroom from the looks of it. King-sized four-poster bed with an elaborate burgundy comforter, antique dresser and vanity, heavy curtains drawn tight across the windows. The bed was made to perfection, not a wrinkle in sight, and sitting right in the middle of it was a tape recorder, one of those old-fashioned ones with the large buttons and cassette tape. It looked completely out of place on the otherwise immaculate bed. I should have backed out right then, called for backup, waited for someone else to arrive. Instead, I stepped into the room, keeping my gun trained on the closet and attached bathroom doorways. Both were empty. The room was secure, yet that feeling of wrongness intensified. I approached the bed, keeping my back to the wall. The tape recorder sat there like an invitation, or a trap. Against my better judgment, I reached out and pressed play. A soft, androgynous voice filled the room. "I've been waiting for you, Sarah Mitchell." My blood turned to ice. How the hell did this recorder know my name? I immediately raised my gun, scanning the room again. Nothing had changed, yet everything felt different. Then I heard it. Footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate steps approaching the bedroom. "This is Officer Mitchell. Identify yourself immediately." The footsteps stopped right outside the door. I moved toward the doorway, gun raised, ready to confront whoever was there. Nobody. The hallway was completely empty. I backed into the room, my heart hammering in my chest. I needed backup. I reached for my radio. "Dispatch, this is Mitchell. I need..." The bedroom door slammed shut with such force the walls shook. I lunged for the handle, but it wouldn't budge, locked or jammed somehow. "Dispatch, come in. I need immediate assistance at 1450 Elm Street." My radio crackled with static, then went silent. I tried again, multiple channels. Nothing but static. The temperature in the room plummeted. I could see my breath coming in panicked clouds now. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to deepen, growing darker than they should be, even spreading where there was light. The tape recorder clicked again, the same voice now louder. "There's no need for that, Officer Mitchell. You're already mine." I fired a warning shot into the ceiling, hoping someone might hear. "Whoever you are, this isn't funny. I am an armed police officer." The shadows began moving unnaturally, detaching from the walls and floor, swirling like smoke. And then I felt it. Something cold brushed against my cheek. Not a breeze, but more like fingers, icy, incorporeal fingers tracing my jawline. I fired again, this time into the darkness gathering in front of me. The bullets disappeared into the swirling shadows with no effect. "Who are you? What do you want?" My voice didn't even sound like my own anymore. High, panicked, desperate. The shadows continued gathering, thickening, taking shape. The room grew so cold, my fingers started to go numb. I fired again and again until my clip was empty, but the darkness kept coming. From the tape recorder, "Everyone who enters stays, Sarah. You'll understand soon enough." I reloaded with trembling hands and backed toward the window, thinking maybe I could break it and call for help. But when I reached for the curtains and pulled them open, there was no window behind them, just a solid brick wall. That's when true panic set in. I turned to run back to the door, but the shadows had completely encircled me now, a whirlwind of darkness that seemed almost alive. I couldn't see the door anymore, couldn't even tell which direction it was in. The shadows pressed closer, and I could feel them now. Not just cold, but somehow hungry. They brushed against my skin, seeping into my clothes, my hair, even seeming to press against my eyelids when I blinked. I saw movement at what I thought was the doorway, a figure standing there just watching. I couldn't make out features, just a darker silhouette against the surrounding darkness, and it was humming, a slow, haunting lullaby that seemed to reverberate through my bones. "Please," I whispered, though I don't know who I was begging. "Please let me go." The figure in the doorway tilted its head, still humming that terrible melody. The shadows swirled, faster, closer, until I could barely breathe. I don't remember what happened next, not clearly. I remember cold, cold so intense it burned. I remember the humming getting louder, surrounding me completely. I remember feeling like I was falling, even though I was standing still. And then, nothing. Blackness. I woke up 3 days later in the woods at the edge of town, still in my uniform, but missing my gun, badge, and radio. I was severely dehydrated and had no memory of how I'd gotten there or what had happened during those missing days. The department investigated, of course. They found my cruiser still parked outside 1450 Elm Street, engine running, driver's door open. They searched the house top to bottom and found nothing unusual. No tape recorder, no locked rooms, no brick walls behind curtains. Just a normal, if lavish, empty house that had been on the market for months. They suspected drugs, a mental breakdown, or that I'd staged the whole thing for attention. The internal investigation cleared me of wrongdoing, but suggested I take medical leave. I'm still on that leave. Here's the thing, though. The property records show no record of anyone living at 1450 Elm Street for the past 20 years. The neighbor who allegedly called in the disturbance denies making any such call. And 3 other officers who responded to calls at that address over the past decade have all either quit the force or been hospitalized for psychiatric issues. I drive by sometimes, even though I know I shouldn't. The house looks perfectly normal in daylight. But at night, I swear I can hear that humming again. And sometimes when I look up at the second-floor windows, I think I see a shadow watching me. I still don't know what happened to me that night. All I know is that something in that house knows my name, and sometimes in my dreams I hear it calling me back. Story 5. I never believed in ghosts or anything supernatural until we bought that house. The Victorian on Cedar Lane was everything my husband Jack and I had dreamed about, 3 stories of ornate woodwork, stained glass windows, a wraparound porch, and enough character to fill 10 modern homes. We got it for a steal too, which should have been our first warning sign. But we were too enchanted by the bay windows and original hardwood floors to question why the previous owners were so eager to sell. We moved in last April. The house needed work, but we were excited about the project. Jack had always been handy, and I had a knack for interior design. The first few weeks were a flurry of unpacking boxes and settling in. Everything seemed normal at first, just the usual creaks and groans you'd expect from a house built in 1892. It started with cold spots. I'd walk through perfectly warm areas of the house and suddenly feel like I'd stepped into a freezer. Jack said it was just poor insulation, and I wanted to believe him. Then came the noises. Faint at first, like someone walking in another room when we were both sitting on the couch. Again, Jack had a logical explanation. Old houses settle. But about 2 months after moving in, I started hearing the whispers. The first time was around 3 in the morning. I woke up suddenly, not sure why, and heard what sounded like hushed conversation coming from somewhere in the house. I nudged Jack, but he was out cold. He could sleep through a tornado. I lay there listening, trying to convince myself it was just the neighbors or maybe the wind. But it didn't sound like either. It sounded like people talking in low, urgent tones. I pulled the covers up to my chin and tried to go back to sleep. By morning, I'd almost convinced myself I'd dreamed it. But it happened again the next night. And the night after that, always around 3 in the morning, always the same hushed, urgent whispers. I started to dread going to bed. Jack thought I was being ridiculous. He never heard anything. He suggested maybe I was hearing the pipes or the heating system. I wanted to believe him. Then one night, about 3 weeks after the whispers started, I woke up at the usual time but noticed something different. The whispers were clearer. I could almost make out words, and they seemed to be coming from inside the walls. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, and listened. They were definitely coming from the direction of Jack's study down the hall. I don't know what possessed me to get out of bed that night. Maybe I was just tired of being afraid, tired of Jack looking at me like I was losing my mind. I grabbed my phone for its flashlight and crept down the hallway toward the study. The whispers got louder as I approached. Standing outside the door, I could almost make out words, something about hiding and never find. My hand shook as I turned the doorknob. The study was bathed in moonlight from the large window. Jack's desk sat in the center, covered in papers from his work. Bookshelves lined the walls, and the whispers, they were definitely coming from the far wall, behind the bookshelf. I moved closer, phone light bobbing in the darkness. That's when I noticed something odd about the wallpaper near the floor. It was peeling away, revealing something underneath. I knelt down and carefully pulled at the loose edge. The wallpaper came away easily, as if it wanted to reveal its secret. Behind it was not the plaster I expected, but wood. As I pulled more wallpaper away, I realized I was looking at a small door, about 3 feet high, built into the wall and papered over who knows how many years ago. The whispers were definitely coming from behind that door. They were growing more insistent now, almost excited. My rational mind told me to wake Jack, to not face whatever this was alone. But something else, some compulsion I couldn't explain, made me reach for the small brass handle that was now exposed. It turned with a soft click, and the door swung inward. The space beyond was small, maybe 6 feet square, with a ceiling so low I would have to crouch to enter. The air that rushed out was stale and cold, carrying the scent of dust and something else, something like old perfume mixed with decay. My phone light revealed bare wooden walls and floors, covered in a thick layer of dust except for what looked like small footprints crisscrossing the floor. In the center of the room sat a wooden chest about the size of a large picnic basket. It was dark wood, ornately carved with floral patterns, and the whispers, God, the whispers were coming from inside that chest. They were louder now, almost like multiple voices arguing with each other. I should have closed that door. I should have run back to bed and pretended I'd never found this room. But instead, I crawled inside. the dust swirling around me in the beam of my phone light. The floor creaked under my weight as I approached the chest. The voices grew more frantic. The chest wasn't locked. The brass latch lifted easily, and I raised the lid slowly, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. Inside, nestled on what looked like an old velvet cloth, was a stack of yellowed photographs and letters tied with a faded ribbon. The whispers stopped the moment I touched the stack, and the sudden silence was almost as unnerving as the voices had been. I untied the ribbon with trembling fingers and picked up the top photograph. It showed a family, a stern-looking man with a large mustache, a woman in a high-necked dress, and 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. They were posed in front of our house, which looked new and well-maintained in the image. But something was wrong with their faces, their eyes. They seemed empty, vacant, not like the normal stiff expressions in old photographs, but like there was nothing behind those eyes at all. I flipped through more photos. The same family in different poses, always with those same vacant expressions. In some, they were joined by other people, servants perhaps, or relatives, who had the same empty stare. In the final photograph, only the woman remained, older now, standing alone on the porch with a look of absolute terror on her face, the only real emotion in any of the images. I set the photos aside and picked up the letters. They were written in an elegant flowing script, dated from 1893 to 1900. They appeared to be from the woman in the photographs, addressed to someone named Eleanor. As I skimmed the first few, they seemed innocent enough. Details about setting up the house, complaints about the servants, gossip about neighbors. But the tone changed in the later letters. The woman, Margaret, she signed herself, began to write about strange occurrences in the house, cold spots, objects moving on their own, and whispers in the walls. The final letter was dated October 12, 1900. The handwriting was shaky, desperate. My dearest Eleanor, if you are reading this, then my fears have been realized. They have found me at last. I cannot escape them now. What Henry did was unforgivable. The children knew, they saw everything. He silenced them one by one, and then himself, but they did not pass on. They remain trapped in these walls, in this house that Henry built to hide his terrible sins. I alone am left, but not for long. They whisper to me constantly now. They blame me for not stopping him. Perhaps they are right. I have sealed the room where it happened. Perhaps that will contain them, but I fear it is too late. They have grown stronger. Last night I saw Henry standing at the foot of my bed, his eyes as empty as they were in life. If you find this, Eleanor, burn this house to the ground. It is the only way to free us all. Your loving sister, Margaret. I sat there in the dust, my blood turning to ice. The house had gone completely silent. No whispers, no creaks, nothing but my own ragged breathing. Then I heard it, a soft thud behind me. The door had swung shut. I scrambled to my feet, hitting my head on the low ceiling, and lunged for the door. The handle wouldn't turn. I pushed, pulled, twisted, nothing. I was trapped. And then the whispers started again, not from the chest this time, but from all around me, from inside the walls of this tiny room. They were angry now, accusing. I couldn't make out specific words, but I could feel the rage behind them. My phone light flickered and died, plunging me into absolute darkness. I screamed then, pounding on the door, calling for Jack. The whispers grew louder, drowning out my cries. I felt something cold brush against my face, my arms, my back, like fingers touching me from all sides. I don't know how long I was trapped in that room. It felt like hours. I curled into a ball on the floor, hands over my ears, trying to block out the increasingly hostile whispers. At some point, I must have passed out from sheer terror. I woke to Jack shaking me, his face pale with worry. The door was open, morning light spilling into the tiny room. He'd found me by following my phone's location when I didn't answer his calls. I tried to show him the photographs, the letters, but the chest was empty. Just an old, dusty box with nothing inside. He didn't believe me about the whispers or the content of the letters. He suggested I'd had some kind of episode, maybe sleepwalking combined with a nightmare. But I knew what I'd seen, what I'd read. We tried to stay in the house. Jack was convinced my experience was just stress from the move and the renovation work. He even suggested I see someone, talk about my anxiety. But the whispers didn't stop. They followed me through the house, growing louder and more insistent each day. I started seeing things too. Shadows moving at the edge of my vision. The fleeting image of a man with a mustache standing in doorways. A child's face peering around corners with those same vacant eyes from the photographs. We lasted 2 more weeks before I told Jack I couldn't stay another night. To his credit, once he realized how much the house was affecting me, he didn't argue. We moved out 4 months after moving in, taking a massive financial hit. We're in an apartment now, looking for a new house, something newer with no history. Jack thinks I'm better, that being away from the stress of renovation has helped, but he doesn't know that I still hear them sometimes. The whispers follow me, fainter now but still there, especially at 3 in the morning. I've researched the history of our old house and found nothing about a family tragedy or deaths. No record of Margaret or Henry or their children. It's like they never existed. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing. But then I wake up at 3 a.m. to those whispers, and I know. Some secrets refuse to stay buried, and some ghosts follow you no matter how far you run. Story 6. I've never been the type to believe in superstitions or ghost stories. Growing up in Swords Creek, Virginia, nestled deep in the Appalachian Mountains, you hear all kinds of tales, but my grandfather's warnings always felt different somehow. They weren't just stories to scare kids, they were rules to live by. Never go into the woods after dark, he'd tell me, his voice carrying that unmistakable Appalachian drawl that somehow made everything sound more serious. What's in those mountains has been there longer than us, and it'll be there long after we're gone. You respect it, it'll respect you back. As a kid, I'd nod along, more afraid of disappointing him than whatever might be lurking among the trees. But as I got older, those rules just became part of who I was, like looking both ways before crossing a street. I never questioned them. I've lived in these mountains my whole life. My place sits at the edge of the woods, about a 15-minute drive from town. It's nothing fancy, just a small 2-bedroom house that my parents left me when they moved to Florida for retirement. I've got my 2 cats, Salem and Luna, for company. They're usually independent creatures, but they've always been good at letting me know when something's off. Last Tuesday marked 1 year since I lost my best friend Reggie. We'd been close since elementary school. The kind of friendship where you don't need to explain yourself. He died in what everyone called a tragic accident, fell from Beartown Mountain while hiking alone. They found his body 2 days later. The police report said he likely lost his footing on a steep trail, but I always felt there was more to the story. Reggie knew those mountains as well as anyone. To mark the anniversary, I invited our mutual friend James over. We're not as close as Reggie and I were, but grief has a way of bonding people. He showed up around 7 in the evening with a 6-pack of beer and a bottle of Reggie's favorite whiskey. "To Reggie," James said, raising his glass after we'd settled in my living room. The whiskey burned going down, but it was a good kind of burn, the kind that reminds you you're still alive. We spent hours talking about Reggie, sharing stories I'd almost forgotten. The time he convinced us to jump off the quarry cliff, even though none of us could swim well. The summer we built a tree house that collapsed the same day we finished it. Simple memories that suddenly felt precious. I noticed Salem and Luna acting strange around 10. They kept pacing by the windows, their tails puffed up, occasionally making these low, growling sounds I'd never heard from them before. I figured maybe a raccoon or possum was rummaging around outside. By midnight, James was pretty wasted. I'd paced myself better, feeling that familiar buzz, but still aware enough to know he shouldn't drive home. "I can crash here," James slurred, sprawled across my couch. "Nah, your wife will worry. I'll walk you home," I said. James lived about a mile away, and the quickest route was through the woods. As soon as I suggested it, I remembered my grandfather's rule: never go into the woods after dark. But it seemed silly now. I was 32 years old, not some scared kid. Besides, the whiskey had made me brave, and the grief had made me reckless. "Come on," I said, helping James to his feet. "Fresh air will do us good." The night was cool for April, with a half moon providing just enough light to see the path. James leaned heavily on my shoulder as we entered the tree line. I remember thinking how quiet it was. No crickets, no rustling leaves, nothing but our footsteps crunching on dead leaves and twigs. The walk to James's place was uneventful. His wife, Karen, answered the door, rolling her eyes at his condition before thanking me for bringing him home safely. The walk back should have taken me 15 minutes tops. I was about halfway home when I noticed the silence. It wasn't just quiet, it was completely silent. The kind of silence that feels heavy, like something's pressing against your ears. I stopped walking, suddenly aware of how alone I was. "You're being paranoid," I muttered to myself, trying to shake off the growing unease. That's when I heard it, my name, whispered from somewhere among the trees. "Lucas." I froze. The voice was soft, almost carried away by the slight breeze, but unmistakable. It sounded exactly like Reggie. "Reggie," I called out, my voice cracking. "Lucas, help me." The voice came from deeper in the woods, away from the path. I took a step toward it, then another. The grief and alcohol clouded my judgment. For a moment I actually believed it might be him, somehow lost in these woods for a year, waiting for me to find him. "Where are you?" I called, moving further from the path. "This way. I'm stuck. Help me." I'd gone about 20 feet off the path when a twig snapped somewhere behind me. I spun around, suddenly realizing how dark it had become. The moon had slipped behind the clouds, and I could barely see the path I'd left. That's when clarity hit me like a bucket of ice water. Reggie was dead. I'd seen his body at the funeral. Whatever was calling my name wasn't him. A cold fear washed over me, sobering me instantly. I turned and ran back toward the path, branches whipping my face as I stumbled through the underbrush. Behind me, I heard movement, not footsteps exactly, but something disturbing the forest floor, following me. "Lucas, don't leave me." The voice was different now, still Reggie's, but wrong somehow, like someone trying to mimic him but not quite getting it right. It was closer, and I ran faster than I ever have in my life. I didn't stop running until I reached my front porch. My hands shook so badly I could barely get the key in the lock. Once inside, I slammed the door shut and locked it, then went around checking every window and the back door, making sure everything was secure. Salem and Luna were hiding under the bed, their eyes wide with fear. When I tried to coax them out, they hissed at me, not in anger but in warning. They could smell the woods on me, and they wanted nothing to do with it. I spent that night on the couch with all the lights on, jumping at every creak and groan of the house settling. I told myself it was just the alcohol, just grief playing tricks on my mind. But deep down, I knew better. I'd broken the rule, and something had noticed. The next few days were worse. I felt watched constantly. At work at the hardware store, I'd catch myself staring out the window, expecting to see someone or something staring back. I started taking the long way home, sticking to main roads instead of the shortcuts through the woods I'd used my whole life. My cats refused to go near the windows after dark. They'd sit in the middle of the living room, eyes fixed on the glass, as if tracking something moving outside. When I tried to look, I never saw anything, but the feeling of being observed intensified. By Friday, I couldn't take it anymore. I texted James. "Something weird happened after I left your place Tuesday. Can you come over? Need to talk." He replied that he'd be over around 7. I felt relieved just knowing someone else would be in the house. At 6:30, I decided to take a quick shower before he arrived. The hot water helped ease the tension I'd been carrying in my shoulders all week. I was just rinsing the shampoo from my hair when I heard knocking at the back door. "James?" I called out, assuming he was early. "Spare keys under the flower pot." I finished my shower and wrapped a towel around my waist. The house felt different somehow, colder, despite the steam from the bathroom following me into the hallway. "James?" I called again, but got no answer. When I reached the living room, I saw the front door standing wide open. Not just unlocked, but fully open, swinging slightly in the evening breeze. James wasn't there. No one was. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. A text from James. "Running late. Be there in 20. Ice filled my veins as I realized what had happened. Something had come to my door, something that had knocked, something that I had invited in. I slammed the front door shut and locked it, then checked the back door. It was unlocked, though I was certain I'd locked it before my shower. I threw on clothes and grabbed my phone, my hands trembling as I called James. "Dude, you need to get here now," I said when he answered. "What's wrong? You sound freaked out. Just get here and don't use the woods." While waiting, I sat in the middle of my living room, back against the couch, facing the front door. Salem and Luna pressed against me, their bodies tense. Something had been in my house, was maybe still in my house, and they knew it. James arrived 20 minutes later, looking concerned. I told him everything, about hearing Reggie's voice in the woods, about the feeling of being watched, about the open door. "Lucas, man, you're stressed. It's the anniversary of Reggie's death. Your mind is playing tricks on you," he said, but I could tell he was unsettled. "You don't understand," I insisted. "My grandfather warned me. There are rules here. I broke them." James stayed for a couple of hours, but nothing happened while he was there. Eventually he left, promising to check in on me the next day. I almost asked him to stay the night, but was too embarrassed. That night I lay awake in bed, cats curled protectively around me. Around 3 in the morning I heard it, soft footsteps moving across my front porch. They stopped at the door, and then came the knocking. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. The cats hissed, backs arched. I held my breath, not daring to move. "Lucas, let me in." Reggie's voice, but not Reggie. "You invited me in once already. That's all it takes." I covered my ears, squeezing my eyes shut like a child hiding from monsters. The knocking continued for what felt like hours, moving from the front door to each window methodically, circling the house. Just before dawn, it stopped. When I finally gathered the courage to look outside, there was nothing there. No footprints in the soft earth around my house, no sign anything had visited. But I know what I heard. I know something is out there, watching, waiting. Whatever dwells in these mountains doesn't forget when its rules are broken, and it doesn't forgive. It's been 5 days now. The knocking comes every night, always at 3. Sometimes it uses Reggie's voice, sometimes my grandfather's, sometimes voices I don't recognize. Last night, it used my own voice to call to me. I don't know how much longer I can stay here, but I'm also afraid to leave. What if it follows me? What if I've already invited it in, not just to my home, but to my life? All I know is that my grandfather was right. There are rules in these mountains, ancient, unwritten rules, and I broke them. Story 7. Been driving trucks for over 20 years now. 20 years of long hauls, bad diner food, and endless highways. Nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, in those 20 years could have prepared me for what happened last October on Route 66. I'm not usually one for sharing personal stuff online, but I need to get this off my chest. Maybe someone else has seen what I saw. Maybe I'm not losing my mind after all. It was late October, around the 27th or 28th, I can't remember exactly. I was hauling a load of electronics from Chicago to Los Angeles. Pretty routine stuff. The company was pushing for a quick delivery, so I was driving through the night to make good time. Around 1 in the morning, I found myself on one of those lonely stretches of Route 66 that cuts through the desert. You know the type. Nothing but darkness and road for miles in every direction. I was fighting to stay awake at that point. I'd already downed 3 cups of coffee from my thermos, and my eyes were starting to play tricks on me. The white lines on the road seemed to be moving on their own sometimes. I had my radio tuned to some late-night talk show, people calling in with conspiracy theories and alien sightings, the usual late-night trucker entertainment. It was helping me stay alert, even if it was mostly nonsense. The moon was barely visible behind some thin clouds, and the only light came from my headlights cutting through the darkness. I remember checking my GPS, still about 6 hours from LA, and my delivery window was tight. I couldn't afford to pull over for sleep, even though my body was screaming for it. That's when everything started to go wrong. First, my radio suddenly cut to static. Just a harsh, loud burst of white noise that made me jump in my seat. I tried changing channels, adjusting the tuner, even smacking the damn thing, but nothing worked. Just that, persistent static. I finally shut it off, leaving me in silence with only the rumble of my engine and the hum of tires on asphalt. I checked my mirrors, force of habit, and that's when I noticed the headlights. They appeared out of nowhere in my rear view, like they'd just materialized on the road behind me. At first I thought nothing of it. Another night driver, probably another trucker, but something felt off about those lights. They were too bright, too white, almost bluish, and they were closing in fast. Now I'm no slowpoke. I was already doing about 70 miles per hour, which is pushing it for a fully loaded semi, but this vehicle was gaining on me like I was standing still. In seconds, it was right on my bumper, those blinding lights flooding my cab so bright I could barely see. My first thought was that it was some jerk in a sports car playing chicken with a truck 4 times his size. It wouldn't be the first time some idiot tried to mess with a trucker, but when I glanced in my mirrors again, I could make out the silhouette of what looked like another semi, a massive one with a tall cab. I pushed my rig harder, hitting 80 miles per hour. My truck was shaking, the load rattling behind me, but that black semi stayed right on my tail, those lights burning into my cab. I couldn't see the driver, couldn't make out any details except that chrome grille gleaming in my mirrors. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, sweat beading on my forehead despite the cool air blasting from the AC. This guy was either drunk, high, or looking to cause an accident. Either way, I needed to get some distance. In desperation, I did something I've never done in 20 years of driving. I hit my brakes hard, not enough to jackknife, but enough to force whoever was behind me to react. The black semi swerved violently, roaring past me on the left. As it passed, I caught a glimpse of the cab. Pitch black, no markings, no company logo, nothing except that blank chrome grille that seemed to grin at me as it went by. Then it was ahead of me, those red taillights disappearing around a curve in the road. Just like that, it was gone. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I pulled over to the shoulder, killing my engine with trembling hands. The desert night was dead silent. No traffic, no wind, nothing. Just me, my breath fogging in the suddenly cold cab, and the distant chirp of desert insects. I sat there for maybe 5 minutes, trying to collect myself. I'm not a small guy, 6'2", 240 pounds, and I've handled my share of trouble at truck stops over the years. But this had me shaken to my core. Something about that truck wasn't right. It had appeared out of nowhere and disappeared just as quickly. I was about to start my engine again when my radio suddenly crackled to life on its own. The static was back, but this time there was a voice cutting through it, a woman's voice, desperate and terrified. "Please help me." The voice was breaking up, fading in and out of the static. "He's coming. He always comes back. Please." Then nothing, just dead silence, not even static. My blood ran cold. I reached for my CB to try to respond, but before I could grab the mic, those headlights appeared again. This time they were coming from ahead of me, from the direction the black semi had disappeared toward. But that was impossible. There were no exits, no turnarounds for miles. How could it have circled back so quickly? Those blinding lights grew larger, bearing down on me at impossible speed. I was still on the shoulder, engine off, completely stationary. The truck was heading straight for me, dead center, a game of chicken I couldn't possibly win. I fumbled for my keys, trying to start my engine, but my hands were shaking so badly I dropped them on the floor. The lights were getting closer, brighter, filling my whole windshield with that unnatural blue-white glare. I closed my eyes, bracing for impact, certain I was about to die. But the crash never came. Instead, I felt a wave of bone-deep cold wash over me, like I'd been plunged into ice water. When I opened my eyes, the truck and its lights had passed through my vehicle like it wasn't even there, like a ghost. I'm not ashamed to admit I screamed. Anyone would have. Somehow I managed to start my truck with trembling hands. I put it in gear and pulled forward, desperate to get moving, to get away from whatever the hell had just happened. That's when I saw him in my headlights. There was a figure standing in the middle of the road about 50 yards ahead, tall and unnaturally thin, wearing what looked like an old-fashioned black coat and wide-brimmed hat. Even from that distance, I could tell something was wrong with the proportions, the arms too long, the stance too rigid, and it was pointing directly at me. I don't know what possessed me, but I hit the gas. Maybe it was fear, maybe anger, maybe just the desperate need to end this nightmare one way or another. My truck lurched forward, picking up speed as I barreled toward the figure. Just before I would have hit it, the figure vanished. Not like someone jumping out of the way, but like a light being switched off. 1 second it was there, the next it was gone. I slammed on my brakes, skidding to a stop in the middle of the empty road. The night was suddenly quiet again. No static on the radio, no mysterious trucks, no strange figures. Just me, alone on Route 66, with my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. I didn't stop driving after that, not for anything. I pushed that truck as fast as it would go all the way to LA, arriving 2 hours ahead of schedule with my hands still shaking on the wheel. I didn't tell anyone at the delivery depot what happened. What could I say? That I was chased by a ghost truck, that I heard a woman's voice begging for help through static, that I saw some kind of supernatural figure pointing at me on the highway. They'd have called for a drug test on the spot. It's been almost 3 months since that night, and I still can't make sense of what happened. I've researched accidents on that stretch of highway, looking for reports of a woman or a truck driver who might have died there. I've found a few old stories, truckers who disappeared without a trace over the years, but nothing concrete. The strangest part, I still drive that route sometimes. I have to. It's my job. But I've never seen the black semi again, never heard that voice on the radio. Sometimes I wonder if exhaustion just got the better of me that night. But then I remember how those lights passed through my truck, how that figure vanished into thin air, and I know what I saw was real. Something happened to me on Route 66 that night, something I can't explain. And the worst part? Every time I drive that stretch of highway now, I can't shake the feeling that it's waiting for me. That black semi is still out there somewhere, cruising the empty stretches of Route 66 after midnight. Sometimes when I glance in my mirrors at night, I expect to see those headlights materialize behind me again. I don't know who that woman was. I don't know what that figure in the road was pointing at. And I don't know if I'll ever have answers. But I know one thing for certain. I never drive Route 66 after midnight anymore, and neither should you. Story 8. I still have nightmares about that night. I've replayed it in my head 1,000 times, wondering what would have happened if I hadn't offered him a ride. It's been 3 months, but I still wake up in cold sweats, feeling those hands grabbing at my clothes, hearing his voice calling my name through the trees. It was mid-July, one of those nights where the heat sticks to your skin even after sunset. I was driving to my friend Kate's cabin in Oak Ridge for a weekend getaway. I'd been stuck in the office all week, drowning in paperwork, and the thought of spending a few days by the lake was the only thing keeping me sane. I left work around 5 in the afternoon, later than I'd planned. Kate had texted me directions to a shortcut that would save me about 45 minutes. "It's a bit isolated," she wrote, "but perfectly safe and cuts through some gorgeous countryside." I should have stuck to the main highway. The shortcut was fine at first, a narrow 2-lane road cutting through farmland that gradually gave way to thick forest. My GPS signal started getting spotty about 2 hours in, but I wasn't worried. Kate's directions were clear, and I had a full tank of gas. The road was empty except for me, and as night fell, I turned up my music to keep myself company. It was around 9 at night when I first saw him. My headlights caught him standing on the shoulder, thumb out, a small duffel bag at his feet. I almost didn't stop. I never pick up hitchhikers. It's one of those rules my dad drilled into me since I was old enough to drive. Better to feel a little guilty passing them by than to end up as a cautionary tale on the evening news, he always said. But something about this guy made me slow down. Maybe it was because I hadn't seen another car for over an hour, or maybe it was the way he looked so defeated standing there in the dark. He wasn't threatening looking, tall and thin, wearing jeans and a faded t-shirt, probably in his early 30s. He looked like he'd been walking for a while. I pulled over about 20 feet ahead of him, my hand hovering over the lock button as he approached. I rolled my window down just a crack. "Car trouble?" I asked, trying to sound friendly but cautious. He nodded, running a hand through his dark hair. "Yeah, broke down about 5 miles back. I've been walking for hours trying to get a signal or find a gas station." His voice was soft with a slight accent I couldn't place. "Name's Sam." I hesitated, looking at the empty road ahead and behind us. The nearest town was at least 30 miles away, according to my last check of the map. It would be a brutal walk in this heat, even at night. "Where are you headed?" I asked. "Just to the next town. I can call for a tow from there." I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was the exhaustion in his eyes, or the fact that I'd want someone to help me if I were stranded out here. I unlocked the passenger door. "I can take you as far as Oak Ridge. That's where I'm going." He smiled, revealing perfectly straight teeth. "Thank you. I really appreciate it." The moment he got in, I felt a twinge of regret. My car suddenly felt smaller, and the scent of his sweat mixed with something else, cigarettes maybe, filled the space. I turned the AC up and pulled back onto the road. For the first 20 minutes or so, we barely spoke. He seemed content to stare out the window at the passing trees, occasionally checking his phone and sighing when he still couldn't get a signal. I kept the radio on low, some indie station playing songs I didn't recognize. "So, what brings you out to Oak Ridge?" he finally asked, turning slightly toward me. "Visiting a friend. She has a cabin by the lake." As soon as the words left my mouth, I wished I hadn't shared that detail. Rule number 1 of picking up strangers: don't tell them you're going to be alone in an isolated cabin. "Nice. I used to camp around there when I was younger." He shifted in his seat, and I noticed how his eyes lingered on me a beat too long. "What's your name?" "Jenna," I said, instantly regretting giving him my real name. "Pretty name." The conversation died again, and I focused on the road. The trees seemed to press closer on either side, creating a tunnel of darkness that my headlights barely penetrated. My GPS had given up entirely, showing my little blue dot in the middle of nowhere, so I was relying on Kate's written directions. Turn right at the fork after the big oak tree, left at the abandoned gas station, straight for 15 miles after that. I glanced at the clock on my dashboard, 9:45. I should reach Kate's place by 10:30 if I kept up this pace. Just 45 more minutes with this stranger, then I'd be safe. That's when I noticed Sam's leg bouncing rapidly. His hands were clenched into fists on his thighs, and he kept looking at me with increasing frequency. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Actually, I think we need to turn around," he said abruptly. "What? Why?" I just remembered there's a better place to get help back the way we came. A bar with a phone I can use. My stomach dropped. We hadn't passed any bar. I was certain of it. "There's a town coming up in about 30 minutes, I said. "You can get help there." He leaned forward, his posture suddenly tense. "No, I really think we should turn around now." His voice had changed, harder now, with an edge that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "I can't turn around. I'm already running late, and this road is too narrow anyway." I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, acutely aware of how alone we were. That's when he reached over and grabbed my arm, his fingers digging painfully into my skin. "Turn the fucking car around." Everything inside me went cold. This was it, the moment every woman dreads. I was trapped in a car with a predator on a deserted road with no cell service. "Let go of me," I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "You're hurting me. Turn around, or I'll hurt you a lot worse," he snarled, his face transformed by anger. He reached toward his duffel bag with his free hand. In that moment, pure survival instinct took over. I remembered seeing a dirt road branching off to the right about a quarter-mile back. Without warning, I slammed on the brakes and yanked the wheel, sending us fishtailing. Sam's head smacked against the passenger window as we skidded onto the dirt road. Before he could recover, I slammed on the brakes again, hard enough that we both lurched forward. His grip on my arm loosened as he tried to brace himself against the dashboard. I didn't hesitate. I hit the unlock button, pushed my door open, and ran. I heard him shouting behind me, the car door slamming as he gave chase. I ran straight into the woods, away from the road, away from the car with my phone and everything else. The only thing that mattered was putting distance between us. The forest was pitch black. I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead, and branches whipped across my face as I ran. I tripped over roots and rocks, scraping my hands and knees, but I didn't slow down. I could hear him crashing through the underbrush behind me, swearing and calling my name. "Jenna, you can't run from me. I know where you're going." That thought propelled me forward with renewed terror. He knew I was headed to a cabin. If I led him straight to Kate's place, I'd be putting her in danger too. I veered left, hoping to circle back toward the main road, where maybe, just maybe, another car might pass. My lungs were burning, and my legs felt like lead. I'd never been athletic, and now I was paying for all those skipped gym sessions. But fear is a powerful motivator. I don't know how long I ran. It felt like hours, but it was probably only 15 or 20 minutes. The woods seemed endless, and I had no idea which direction I was heading anymore. The only constant was the sound of Sam behind me, sometimes closer, sometimes farther, but always there. Then I saw it, a light through the trees. At first I thought I was hallucinating, but as I stumbled closer, I realized it was a porch light, Kate's cabin. By some miracle, I had run in the right direction. I recognized the rustic A-frame structure from the photos Kate had sent me. Her blue Subaru was parked outside. I sprinted the last 100 yards, my entire body screaming in pain. Behind me, I heard Sam shout, "I see you, Jenna. I know where you are." I reached the porch and pounded on the door, sobbing and screaming Kate's name. The seconds it took her to answer felt like an eternity. When the door finally swung open, I fell inside, gasping for breath. "Jenna? What the hell? You're bleeding." Kate's face was a mask of confusion and concern. "Lock the door," I screamed. "Call the police." She didn't ask questions. She slammed the door shut and threw the deadbolt, then grabbed her phone from the coffee table. As she dialed 911, I collapsed onto the floor, my legs finally giving out. Through the window, I could see a figure at the edge of the clearing, Sam, watching the cabin. He didn't approach immediately. He just stood there, a dark silhouette against the trees. Kate was talking to the dispatcher, giving our location, explaining that someone was stalking her friend. I tried to catch my breath enough to tell her what happened, but all I could manage were broken sentences. Picked up, hitchhiker, tried to attack me. She knelt beside me, her free hand gripping mine. "The police are coming, but it'll take them at least 20 minutes to get here. We're pretty isolated." That's when the knocking started. Soft at first, almost polite. Then harder, more insistent. "Jenna," Sam's voice called through the door. "Open up. Let's talk about this. I think you misunderstood the situation." Kate's eyes widened in terror. She grabbed a shotgun from a cabinet next to the fireplace, something I didn't even know she owned. "Get away from my door, or I'll shoot you through it," she shouted, her voice steadier than I would have expected. The knocking stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Then Sam's voice again, softer now. "I'll be seeing you again, Jenna. Count on it." We heard footsteps retreating from the porch, then silence. Kate and I huddled together on the floor, the shotgun across her lap, watching the windows and door. Every creak of the cabin, every rustle of leaves outside made us jump. The police arrived 30 minutes later, by which time there was no sign of Sam. They searched the woods but found nothing. My car was still parked on the dirt road, untouched. Sam's duffel bag was gone. They took my statement, had me describe Sam, and promised to patrol the area. One officer suggested that maybe Sam had just panicked when I swerved off the road, that maybe I'd misinterpreted his intentions. But the look in the female officer's eyes told me she knew better. She knew what Sam had planned to do to me in those woods. That was 3 months ago. I haven't driven alone at night since then. I jump at shadows and check my back seat obsessively before getting into my car. I've moved from my ground floor apartment to a secured building with cameras and a doorman. The police never found Sam. They couldn't find any reports of an abandoned vehicle on that highway. It's like he appeared out of nowhere, specifically for me. Sometimes I wonder if he's watching me, waiting for another opportunity. Sometimes I think I see him in a grocery store, at a gas station, walking down the street across from my office. Just glimpses of a tall, thin man who disappears when I look again. I'll never pick up another hitchhiker. I'll never take another shortcut. And I'll never forget the sound of his voice calling my name through the trees. Story 9. I still haven't told many people about what happened to me on Highway 61 last month. I've been trying to make sense of it, but I can't. I know what I saw and I know what I experienced, but it just doesn't add up logically. Writing this down might help me process it, and maybe someone out there has gone through something similar. It was a Thursday night when I was driving back to my apartment in Atlanta after visiting my parents in rural Georgia. I'd made this trip dozens of times before, usually during daylight hours, but this time I stayed for dinner and ended up leaving much later than planned. My mom kept insisting I have just one more slice of her peach cobbler, and honestly, I couldn't say no. By the time I hit the road, it was already getting dark. I wasn't too worried though. My GPS estimated I'd be home by midnight if I took the main highways, but I remembered a shortcut I'd used a few times before, Highway 61. It's this narrow 2-lane road that cuts through some dense woods and shaves about 20 minutes off the drive. During the day, it's actually kind of pretty in a rustic way. I plugged the route into my GPS and turned onto Highway 61 at around 11:30. At first, everything seemed normal. The road was empty, which wasn't surprising given the time and how rural the area is. My headlights carved through the darkness, illuminating the endless rows of pine trees on either side of the road. I had the radio on, some late-night talk show that was keeping me company. About 15 minutes in, I noticed something strange. The radio started to fade in and out, eventually turning to static. I tried to find another station, but every frequency was the same wall of white noise. I switched it off, and that's when I realized how eerily quiet it was. There was just the hum of my engine and the sound of tires on asphalt. No crickets, no distant traffic, nothing. The monotony of the drive started to get to me. It was just endless trees and those white lines on the road that seemed to hypnotize you if you stared at them too long. I checked the time, 11:55. I'd be home soon enough. That's when I saw the first hitchhiker. He was standing on the right shoulder of the road, back turned to me, thumb extended. Even from behind, something about him seemed off. His clothes were ragged and torn in places, hanging off his thin frame like they belonged to someone else. And he was so still, unnaturally still, like he wasn't even breathing. For a split second, I actually considered stopping. It was cold out in the middle of nowhere, but something in my gut told me not to. I drove past him, accelerating a bit more than necessary, and watched in my rearview mirror as his figure got smaller and disappeared into the darkness. I remember letting out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Weird place to be hitchhiking, I said to myself, trying to break the silence in the car. A few miles later, I saw another hitchhiker, a woman this time, standing on the opposite side of the road. Unlike the man, she was facing my direction, staring directly at my car as I approached. Her expression was completely blank, but expectant somehow, like she knew I would come. Her clothes were just as tattered as the man's, and her hair was wild and unkempt, like she'd been caught in a storm. As I passed her, I felt this overwhelming urge to look in my rearview mirror. When I did, she was gone. Not walking away, not obscured by darkness, just gone, as if she'd never been there at all. I checked the dashboard clock, 12 midnight exactly. That seemed odd. I'd been driving for at least 20 minutes since I last checked the time. I tapped the clock display, thinking it might be stuck, but the seconds were still ticking forward. I pressed down harder on the gas pedal. The sooner I got home, the better. The trees seemed to close in on either side of the road, making it feel narrower than it actually was. I hadn't seen another car since turning onto Highway 61, which wasn't helping my growing unease. Then I saw him again, the first hitchhiker. Same position, same tattered clothes, same extended thumb. And it looked like he was standing in exactly the same spot as before. "What the hell?" I muttered, slowing down slightly as I approached. This couldn't be the same person. I'd been driving straight for miles. There was no way he could have gotten ahead of me. I sped past him again, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. This time I didn't look back. The GPS showed I was still on Highway 61, still heading in the right direction toward Atlanta. But something was wrong. I should have reached the interstate by now. I kept driving, pushing my speed up to 70, then 80. A few minutes later, there she was again, the woman hitchhiker in the exact same spot with the exact same vacant stare. I flew past her, heart pounding, and checked my rearview mirror. Gone again. I checked the clock, still midnight. The GPS still showed Highway 61. This impossible pattern continued as I drove faster and faster. The hitchhikers appeared every few miles, sometimes the man, sometimes the woman, sometimes both standing on opposite sides of the road, always in the same positions, always with the same vacant expressions. My GPS showed I was driving in circles, but that was impossible. I hadn't made any turns. Panic really started to set in when I realized I'd been driving for what felt like hours, but the clock still read 12 midnight. My tank was almost full when I started, but now the fuel gauge was dipping dangerously low. I needed to find help, or at least figure out where the hell I actually was. Just when I thought I might run out of gas in the middle of nowhere, I spotted the glow of lights up ahead. A gas station, one of those old-fashioned ones with just a couple of pumps and a small convenience store. I nearly cried with relief. I pulled in, the tires crunching on gravel. The place looked ancient, with an old-style analog pump and a flickering neon open sign in the window. I got out of my car on shaky legs and headed inside. The bell above the door jingled as I entered. Behind the counter stood an old man with a deeply lined face and white stubble. He looked up from a dog-eared paperback and watched me with curious eyes. "Evening," he said, his voice rough like sandpaper. Or I guess it's morning now. I glanced at my watch, still midnight. The wall clock behind him showed 3:15 a.m. "My watch must be broken," I said, tapping the face of it. He nodded slowly, still studying me. "You look like you've seen something." "Out there." I hesitated, not sure how much to say. Would he think I was crazy, drunk? But I needed answers. "I've been driving on Highway 61 for hours," I said finally, "but I can't seem to get anywhere. And there are these people, hitchhikers. I keep seeing the same ones over and over." The old man didn't look surprised. In fact, he looked like he'd heard this exact story before. "You seen something out there, didn't you? On the highway," he said, not really a question. "Happens sometimes." "What happens?" I pressed, leaning on the counter. "What are they?" He sighed and closed his book. "Ghosts, or something like them. Highway 61's got a history. Bad accidents, disappearances. Some folks say the road doesn't want to let certain people go." "That's insane," I said, though after what I'd experienced, I wasn't sure what to believe anymore. "Maybe so," he shrugged. "But you're here now. Fill up your tank, get some coffee. When you leave, take the first right after the station. It'll put you on Route 9. Longer way around, but it'll get you where you're going." I did as he suggested, filling my tank and buying the strongest coffee they had. As I was paying, I noticed a bulletin board near the register with faded missing persons posters. One of them showed a young woman with long dark hair, the same woman I'd seen on the road. The poster was dated 1987. I didn't ask about it. I didn't want to know. I got back in my car and followed the old man's directions, taking the first right after the station. The road looked normal, with proper markings and even some late-night traffic. My GPS recalculated and showed I was indeed on Route 9, heading toward Atlanta. When I finally reached my apartment building, it was almost 4 in the morning. I was exhausted, confused, and still scared, but relieved to be home. I grabbed my overnight bag from the back seat and walked toward the building entrance. That's when I felt the air around me go cold. I glanced toward the edge of the parking lot, where the asphalt meets the tree line. Standing in the shadows, with his thumb extended, was the hitchhiker. I haven't driven after dark since then. I've tried researching Highway 61, looking for stories similar to mine or information about accidents there. I found some old newspaper articles about a series of disappearances in the 1980s, young drivers who vanished while using that road as a shortcut. The articles mentioned 2 people specifically, a man who disappeared after his shift at a local factory and a woman on her way home from college. I keep telling myself there must be a logical explanation for what happened. Maybe I fell asleep at the wheel and dreamed the whole thing. Maybe someone drugged me at that gas station. Maybe I had some kind of psychotic break. But deep down, I know what I saw. And sometimes when I look out my apartment window at night, I see them standing there in the distance, waiting, like they're trying to tell me something. Or maybe they're just waiting for me to give them a ride. Story 10. I've been driving trucks for nearly 20 years now. Long hauls, short hauls, dangerous roads, you name it, I've done it all. I've seen some weird stuff out there on the lonely stretches of highway that crisscross this country. Weird weather, strange accidents, bizarre roadkill. But what happened to me last October on old Route 66? I still can't explain it. I'm not even sure I want to try, but I need to get this off my chest. It was around 2 in the morning. I'd been driving for about 14 hours with just a couple quick stops. I was hauling electronics from Chicago to Albuquerque. Nothing unusual about the job itself. I still had a few hours to go before I'd hit my legal driving limit, and I figured I'd push through until I couldn't anymore. The road was completely empty. No cars, no trucks. Just the endless ribbon of asphalt cutting through the dark Midwest landscape. The night was unusually dark. No moon, and the stars seemed dimmer than normal. My high beams were cutting through a fog that had settled in patches along the road. It wasn't thick enough to slow me down, just these weird pockets of mist hovering over the asphalt. I remember checking my watch. It was exactly 2:13 in the morning when I felt it, this sudden heaviness in the air. It was like the atmosphere inside my cab had changed, gotten thicker somehow. I turned up the heat because I felt this unexpected chill. I figured I was just tired, you know. When you've been driving as long as I have, you learn to recognize when your mind starts playing tricks on you. That's when I saw her. Just around a bend in the road, standing at the edge of my headlights, was a young woman waving her arms frantically. She was wearing this white dress that seemed to glow in my headlights. My first instinct was to keep driving. I hate to admit it, but that's the truth. In my line of work, you hear stories about highway robberies that start with someone pretending to need help, but something about her face, this desperate, terrified expression, made me slow down. I pulled over about 20 feet ahead of her. Through my side mirror, I watched her run toward my truck. She moved weird, kind of jerky, like she was hurt or something. I rolled down my window just a crack when she reached my door. "Thank you for stopping," she said, breathing hard. "My car broke down about a mile back. I've been walking for hours and no one would stop." Her voice was soft but had this strange echo to it, like she was talking inside an empty room. I didn't think much of it at the time. She looked young, maybe 20 at most. Pale skin, dark hair pulled back in a style that seemed old-fashioned. I can't really explain it. She wasn't dressed for the cold either, just that thin white dress that hung loose on her frame. No jacket, no purse, nothing. "Where you headed?" I asked, still keeping the window mostly up. "Just up the road a ways," she said, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "Please, I need to get home. It's not safe out here." Against my better judgment, I unlocked the passenger door. "Climb in," I told her. "I can drop you off at the next town if that helps." The moment she opened the door, the temperature in the cab dropped at least 20 degrees. I'm not exaggerating. It went from comfortable to freezing in seconds. I cranked the heat all the way up, but it didn't seem to make any difference. "Thank you," she said as she settled into the passenger seat. "I'm Eleanor." I introduced myself as Max and pulled back onto the road. That's when I noticed the smell. It was like flowers, roses maybe, but with this underlying rotting scent, like flowers left too long in a vase of stagnant water. I figured maybe she'd been walking for a while and gotten sweaty or something, though that didn't really explain the floral smell. "So what happened to your car?" I asked, trying to make conversation and ignore the dropping temperature. "It just stopped," she said, staring straight ahead. "In the same spot it always does." I didn't know what to make of that comment, so I just nodded and kept driving. The heater was blasting, but I could see my breath forming clouds in front of my face. My fingers were starting to go numb on the steering wheel. We drove in silence for about 15 minutes. The whole time I kept glancing over at her. Something felt off. She sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, staring out the windshield. Not once did she fidget or adjust herself like a normal person would. Just sat there, rigid like a mannequin. Then she suddenly pointed to a dirt road coming up on the right. "Turn here," she said. "That's not the way to town," I replied. I knew Route 66 pretty well, and the next proper town was straight ahead, maybe another 20 miles. "Please," she insisted, her voice taking on an urgent quality. "They'll find us if we don't." "Who'll find us?" I asked, slowing down anyway. She didn't answer, just kept pointing at the turnoff. I don't know why I listened to her. Some combination of exhaustion and curiosity, I guess. I turned onto the dirt road, my headlights bouncing over the uneven surface. The road narrowed as we went, with overgrown trees pressing in from both sides, branches scraping against the side of my truck. After about half a mile, an old house appeared in my headlights. It was a 2-story farmhouse, the kind you see abandoned all over the Midwest. Paint peeling, windows broken, porch sagging. It looked like no one had lived there for decades. "Stop here," Eleanor said. Before I could even bring the truck to a complete stop, she had the door open. "Is this where you live?" I asked, confused. The place was clearly abandoned. "I have to go now," she said, not answering my question. "Thank you for the ride, Max." She stepped out of the truck and walked toward the house. I rolled down my window to call after her, to ask if she was sure this was the right place, but the words died in my throat when I saw how she was moving. Her feet weren't quite touching the ground. It was subtle, but in the glow of my headlights, I could see a gap between her shoes and the dirt path. I sat there, frozen, as she walked up to the house and simply disappeared through the front door. Not opened it, went through it. My heart was hammering in my chest. I put the truck in reverse, ready to get the hell out of there, when my headlights swept across something at the edge of the property. A small, weathered wooden sign, the kind you might see marking a grave. I should have just driven away. I should have floored it and never looked back. But I didn't. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove compartment and stepped out of the truck. The air outside was actually warmer than inside my cab. The smell of rotting flowers was stronger here. I approached the sign slowly, my flashlight beam bouncing with each step. When I got close enough to read it, my blood turned to ice. Eleanor Grayson, gone but not forgotten, 1920 to 1940. I ran back to my truck faster than I've ever moved in my life. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I reversed down that dirt road like a man possessed. branches scraping against the paint, rocks pinging off the undercarriage. When I finally made it back to Route 66, I didn't slow down for at least 20 miles. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had I imagined it? Was I so tired that I'd hallucinated the whole thing? Around 4 in the morning, I pulled into a truck stop, desperate for coffee and human contact. The place was nearly empty except for a few other drivers and a middle-aged waitress behind the counter. I must have looked like hell because she took one look at me and poured a coffee without me even asking. "You okay, honey?" she asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I almost laughed at how accurate that statement was. "I think I might have," I admitted, my voice sounding strange even to my own ears. The waitress, her name tag said Darlene, set down the coffee pot and leaned on the counter. "Let me guess. Young woman in a white dress, out on old Route 66. My mouth went dry. "How did you know that?" Darlene sighed. "You're not the first trucker to come in here looking like death warmed over after giving Eleanor Grayson a ride." She told me that Eleanor had died in a car crash back in 1940, right on that stretch of Route 66. She'd been driving home late at night when her car broke down. While walking for help, she was struck by a drunk driver who fled the scene. They found her body the next morning. The story goes that her spirit still haunts that highway, looking for rides home to the farmhouse where she grew up. "But the house I saw was abandoned," I said. "Has been since the 50s. Darlene confirmed. "The Grayson family moved away after Eleanor died. Couldn't stand living there with the memories, I guess." I sat there for nearly an hour, drinking coffee after coffee, trying to process what had happened. Darlene shared a few more stories from other drivers who'd encountered Eleanor over the years. Some just saw her on the roadside but didn't stop. Others, like me, had given her a ride. The details were always the same. The white dress, the cold, the smell of rotting flowers. When I finally went back to my truck, something caught my eye on the passenger seat. A single white flower, I think it was a lily, was lying there. It wasn't there when I left the truck. I'm absolutely certain of that. I picked it up with trembling fingers. It felt real enough, but as I held it, the petals began to turn brown at the edges, decaying right before my eyes. Within seconds, it had withered completely, crumbling to dust in my palm. I finished my delivery the next day, but I requested a different route for my return journey. My dispatcher thought I was crazy, but I didn't care. I haven't driven on Route 66 since, and I don't plan to ever again. Sometimes when I'm driving late at night, I find myself checking the rearview mirror more often than necessary, half expecting to see Eleanor sitting in my sleeper cab. And whenever the temperature suddenly drops in my truck, I turn the radio up loud to drown out the silence. I've been a truck driver for almost 20 years. I've seen a lot of strange things on the road, but that night last October, I gave a ride to a ghost, a woman who'd been dead for over 80 years. And the strangest part? I sometimes catch myself looking for her when I'm driving at night, like some part of me wants to see her again, to confirm that I didn't imagine the whole thing. I still have no explanation for what happened. All I know is that somewhere out there on old Route 66, Eleanor Grayson is still trying to get home. Story 11. Urai. I never thought I'd be the type of person to share something like this online, but I don't know where else to turn. I can't talk to my parents about it. They already think I need therapy. My friends, well, they were there that night, but now they pretend nothing happened. I need to get this off my chest before I completely lose my mind. This all happened 3 weeks ago in my hometown of Pine Grove. It's one of those places that doesn't even show up on most maps. Just a cluster of houses, a main street with a handful of stores and woods. Lots and lots of woods. Everyone knows everyone here, which is why Kessler's toy shop was such a big deal in local lore. The shop had been abandoned since the 80s, when old man Kessler vanished without a trace. My grandma used to tell me stories about how he made the most beautiful dolls anyone had ever seen. She even had one as a kid, a porcelain doll with auburn hair and green glass eyes that she swore followed you around the room. She got rid of it after Kessler disappeared because it gave her the creeps. The rumors about Kessler were the kind of stories teenagers tell each other at sleepovers. Some said he was just a harmless old man who moved away. Others claimed he practiced black magic and tried to put real souls into his dolls. The most popular theory was that he killed himself in the shop's basement workshop and his ghost still haunts the place. Whatever happened, the shop remained locked up and untouched for decades, with all his creations still inside. That Friday night started like any other in our boring town. Me, my boyfriend Jake, my best friend Mia, and her boyfriend Zach were hanging out at the abandoned playground behind the elementary school, passing around a bottle of vodka Zach had stolen from his parents' liquor cabinet. "I'm so sick of this town," Mia said, taking a swig from the bottle. "Nothing ever happens here." "We could drive to Riverdale," Jake suggested. "The movie theater there is showing that new horror film." Zach shook his head. "My car's almost out of gas and I'm broke until payday." That's when I had the stupid idea. "What about Kessler's?" The others looked at me like I'd suggested jumping off a cliff. "Lily, are you serious?" Mia asked, her eyes wide. "Why not? We've been talking about checking it out since freshman year." I took the bottle from her and drank, the alcohol burning my throat and making me braver than I should have been. "Unless you're scared." "I'm not scared," Zach said immediately. "But that place has been locked up forever. How would we even get in?" Jake grinned. "The back window's broken. Tyler Wilson told me he peeked inside last summer on a dare." "Did he go in?" I asked. "Nah, he chickened out. Said he saw something move inside." Mia rolled her eyes. "Tyler's full of shit. He also claimed he saw Bigfoot in his backyard last year." We all laughed, and just like that, our plans were set. Looking back, I wish we'd gone to that movie instead. Kessler's toy shop sat at the end of Main Street where the pavement gives way to a dirt road leading into the woods. It was a Victorian-style building with faded blue paint and ornate woodwork around the windows. A weather-beaten sign hung above the door, the words, "Kessler's Toys and Dolls," barely visible beneath years of grime. It was almost 11 at night when we got there. The streetlights ended a block away, so we used our phone flashlights to guide us. The shop looked even creepier in the dark, like something from a nightmare. The windows were covered with decades of dust, making it impossible to see inside. "This is it," Jake whispered, although there was no one around to hear us. "The broken windows around back." We followed him to the rear of the building, where, sure enough, one of the small windows had a jagged hole in it, just big enough for a person to squeeze through. "Ladies first?" Zach joked, nudging me. "Screw you," I laughed, nervously. "Jake's going first since this was his brilliant idea." Jake shrugged and handed me his phone. "Hold this while I check if it's safe." He hoisted himself up to the window, carefully avoiding the broken glass, and disappeared inside. For a moment, there was silence, and my heart pounded in my chest. What if something had happened to him? Then his face appeared at the window. "All clear. It's just dusty as hell in here." One by one, we climbed through the window, entering what appeared to be a storage room. The air was thick with dust and had a strange, sweet smell, like old perfume mixed with something else I couldn't identify. Our flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing shelves lined with cardboard boxes and old inventory records. "This is kind of a letdown," Mia whispered, brushing cobwebs from her hair. "I was expecting something scarier." "The shop's through that door," Jake pointed. "This is just the back room." We made our way to the door, which opened with a drawn-out creak that made my skin crawl. And then we were in the main shop, and it was nothing like I expected. Despite being abandoned for decades, it looked like Kessler had just stepped out for lunch. There was no dust on the counters or display cases. Toys lined the shelves, wooden trains, rocking horses, tin soldiers, and music boxes, all in pristine condition. But the dolls were everywhere, hanging from the ceiling, perched on shelves, seated in tiny chairs arranged in circles like they were having tea parties. Hundreds of glass eyes seemed to track our movements. "Okay, this is definitely creepy," Zach said, shining his light on a particularly lifelike doll with blonde curls and rosy cheeks. They look so real. My grandma wasn't kidding about the eyes, I murmured, moving closer to one of the dolls. It had a girl's face with delicate features, long eyelashes, a small button nose, and lips curved in a gentle smile. Its eyes were a deep blue that seemed to hold depth beyond the glass. "Guys, check this out," Mia called from behind the counter. She'd found an old cash register with the drawer hanging open. Inside was a leather-bound book with yellowed pages. "Looks like Kessler's journal or something." We gathered around as she opened it, revealing neat handwriting in faded ink. "April 3rd, 1978, Mia read aloud. "The Anderson girl came for her fitting today. Such bright eyes, so full of life. They will be perfect for doll number 43. She turned the page. "June 15th, 1978. The essence transfer was more difficult this time. The boy struggled, had to increase the dosage. His hair will make a lovely addition to number 44. A chill ran down my spine. What the hell does that mean? "It means Kessler was a fucking psycho," Zach said, taking a step back from the counter. "Those rumors about him putting souls in the dolls." "It's probably just his weird way of describing his work," Jake interrupted, but he sounded uncertain, like he was taking inspiration from real kids. I wasn't convinced. Something about this place felt wrong, like we were being watched by more than just glass eyes. "Maybe we should go." "Wait," Jake said, shining his light toward the back of the shop. "There's another door over there. Bet that leads to the workshop where he made these things." Part of me wanted to leave right then, but curiosity won out. We crossed the shop floor, passing between rows of dolls that seemed to turn their heads just slightly when our lights moved away from them. At least, that's what it felt like. The door was heavy oak with a brass knob shaped like a doll's head. It wasn't locked. Jake pulled it open to reveal a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. "The basement workshop," he whispered, excitement in his voice. "This is where the magic happened. Or where he murdered kids and stole their souls," Zach muttered. "Just saying." We descended the stairs, the wooden steps creaking beneath our weight. The sweet smell was stronger here, mixed with something chemical like formaldehyde. At the bottom was another door, this one slightly ajar. Jake pushed it open and we entered Kessler's workshop. It was a large room with stone walls and a cement floor. Workbenches lined the perimeter, covered with tools, jars of paint, spools of thread, and containers filled with hair of different colors. In the center stood a large table with leather straps attached to its edges. Dark stains marked the surface. "Those look like restraints," Mia whispered, her voice shaking. "Why would a doll maker need restraints?" On shelves along the walls were dozens of unfinished dolls, some just hollow heads with empty eye sockets, others lacking limbs or hair. Jars filled with glass eyes of every color lined one shelf, suspended in clear liquid. I moved deeper into the room, drawn to a workbench in the corner that was cleaner than the others. A single doll lay on its surface, covered by a velvet cloth. Something compelled me to approach it, despite every instinct screaming at me to run. "Lily, don't touch anything," Jake warned, but his voice seemed distant. I reached the workbench and gently pulled back the velvet cloth. The doll beneath was unlike any of the others. It had a girl's face, maybe 16 or 17 my age, with soft brown hair and closed eyes. It wore a simple white dress that looked freshly sewn. Its skin wasn't porcelain, but a material that looked disturbingly like real human skin, with tiny freckles across the nose and a small scar on the chin. And it had my face. I gasped, stumbling backward. "Guys, what is it?" Mia rushed over, then froze when she saw the doll. "Holy shit, Lily. It looks just like you." Jake and Zach joined us, their flashlights illuminating the doll's uncanny resemblance to me. "That's impossible," Jake whispered. "Kessler disappeared decades ago. How could he make a doll that looks like you?" My hand seemed to move of its own accord, reaching out to touch the doll's face. The skin felt warm, almost alive. As my fingertips brushed its cheek, the doll's eyes snapped open, brown eyes exactly like mine. and its small pink lips parted. "You shouldn't have come here," it whispered in a child's voice. I screamed and jumped back, colliding with Mia. From above us came a sound like rain, a light pattering that grew louder by the second. Then we heard it, the sound of tiny feet on wooden floors, of small joints creaking, of little porcelain hands dragging across surfaces. "The dolls," Zach gasped. "They're moving." We looked up to see the first of them descending the stairs, a boy doll in a sailor suit moving with jerky but deliberate steps. Behind it came others, dozens of them climbing down from wherever they'd been positioned in the shop. "Run!" Jake shouted, grabbing my arm and pulling me toward the stairs. But the doll on the workbench, my doll, sat up, its movements fluid like a real person. "Too late," it said, its voice stronger now. "He's been waiting for you, Lily. We've all been waiting." The basement door slammed shut, cutting off our escape. The dolls were coming down the stairs now, their tiny hands reaching for us, glass eyes gleaming in the light of our phones. Mia screamed as one of them grabbed her ankle. She kicked it away, sending it flying across the room, but it got up immediately and continued its approach. "The window!" Zach pointed to a small window near the ceiling, just big enough for us to squeeze through. He dragged a workbench beneath it and climbed up, smashing the glass with his elbow. "Come on!" Jake helped Mia up first, then me. I was halfway through the window when I felt something grab my leg, the doll from the workbench. Its grip was surprisingly strong, and its eyes, my eyes, stared up at me with a hunger that made my blood run cold. "You're supposed to stay," it hissed. "You're supposed to become like us." Jake grabbed my arms and pulled hard, wrenching me, free from the doll's grasp. We tumbled onto the damp grass outside, and Zach slammed the window shut behind us. Through the broken glass, I could see dozens of dolls crowding beneath the window, their tiny faces pressed against the pane, mouths opening and closing silently. We ran through the woods behind the shop, not stopping until we reached the main road. None of us spoke as we walked home, too shocked by what we'd experienced. We agreed to meet the next day to talk about what happened, but when morning came, they all had different stories. Mia claimed we'd gotten drunk and scared ourselves with our imaginations. Zach said he remembered going to the shop, but insisted we'd found nothing but dust and cobwebs. Jake was the worst. He acted like I was crazy when I mentioned the dolls moving or the one that looked like me. But I know what I saw, and it's not over. 3 weeks have passed, and every night since then, I've heard tapping at my bedroom window, tiny fingernails on glass. Sometimes I see small shadows moving across my lawn. Twice I've found doll-sized footprints in the dirt beneath my window. Last night, I woke to find my closet door open and caught a glimpse of something scurrying under my bed. Something with glass eyes that reflected the moonlight. When I checked this morning, I found a small piece of white fabric torn from a doll's dress. The shop is still there, sealed up again as if we never broke in. But people in town have started talking. They say they can hear music coming from inside late at night, the tinkling of a music box playing a lullaby. Some claim they've heard whispers when they walk past, small voices calling out names, inviting them inside. I don't know what Kessler did in that basement workshop all those years ago, or where he went, but I know his dolls are alive somehow, and they're not finished. That doll with my face is waiting for me to return, to complete whatever process Kessler started. And sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I swear my eyes look more like glass than flesh. Story 12. I've always been the rational type. The guy who laughs at ghost stories around campfires and rolls his eyes when people talk about bad vibes or whatever. Not that I'm some hardcore skeptic. I just prefer explanations that don't involve the supernatural or conspiracy theories. But what happened to me 3 months ago on Route 16 changed something in me. I'm still trying to process it. For context, I live in Northern California, about 40 minutes outside Sacramento, in one of those towns that's barely a dot on the map. It's beautiful country out here, all rolling hills, pine forests, and mountain views, but isolated. I work as a network administrator at a data center in the city, which means late shifts and a long commute on rural roads. There's this particular stretch of Route 16 that runs alongside the mountains for about 15 miles. It's narrow, winding, and pitch black at night. No streetlights, just your headlights cutting through the darkness. The locals call it Disappearance Road because over the years there have been stories about people going missing along that route. Cars found abandoned, drivers never seen again. The usual small-town folklore that gets embellished with each telling. I never put much stock in those stories. I'd driven that road hundreds of times without incident. But now I understand why people warn against traveling it after dark. It was a Thursday in January, just after the New Year. I'd been pulling a double shift because one of our servers crashed, and I didn't leave Sacramento until almost 1 in the morning. It was pouring rain, one of those winter storms that makes you question whether your windshield wipers are actually doing anything, the kind where you have to lean forward and squint just to make out the yellow line in the road. I was exhausted, cranking the AC and blasting music just to stay alert. My headlights barely penetrated the wall of rain, and I was going maybe 35 in a 55 zone. I remember checking the time, 1:27, and calculating when I'd finally get home and fall into bed. That's when I saw him. At first, it was just a vague shape on the roadside, a darker shadow against the black backdrop of trees. As I got closer, my headlights illuminated a man standing just off the shoulder, thumb extended. He was wearing a dark jacket with the hood up, jeans soaked through, no backpack or anything. Just standing there in the middle of nowhere, in a downpour, well past midnight. Every instinct told me to keep driving. I'm not the type to pick up hitchhikers even in broad daylight, but something about seeing someone out there in such miserable conditions made me hesitate. The temperature was dropping, the nearest town was at least 8 miles away, and cell service in these parts is spotty at best. If I left him there, who knew how long he'd be stranded? I slowed down, which I now recognize as the first in a series of terrible decisions. When I pulled over, the man jogged to my passenger side. I rolled down the window just enough to hear him over the rain. "Hey man, thanks for stopping," he said, rainwater streaming down his face. "I've been out here for almost an hour." He looked normal enough, maybe mid-30s, dark hair plastered to his forehead, 2 or 3 days of stubble, no obvious red flags. "Where are you headed?" I asked, still not fully committed to giving him a ride. "Just to the next town, if that's not too much trouble. My truck broke down a few miles back and I need to get to a phone." He had a slight Texas accent which seemed odd for these parts, but not alarming. I hesitated another moment, then unlocked the door. "Hop in. I can take you to Auburn. It's on my way." He slid into the passenger seat, bringing with him the smell of rain and cigarettes. Up close, I could see his clothes were completely drenched. "Man, I can't thank you enough," he said, rubbing his hands together for warmth. "Thought I was going to have to spend the night out there." I nodded and pulled back onto the road, immediately regretting my decision. There was something off about him that I couldn't quite place. Maybe it was the way his eyes kept darting around the car interior, or how he positioned himself, angled toward me rather than facing forward. We drove in awkward silence for a few minutes. I turned the radio down but kept it on, some late-night talk show discussing conspiracy theories, ironically enough. The rain hammered against the roof of my Honda Civic, and the wipers squeaked rhythmically across the windshield. "So what were you doing out here so late?" I finally asked, trying to sound casual. "Visiting a friend," he replied without elaborating. "You heading home from work?" I nodded, not wanting to provide too much personal information. "Yeah, long day." More silence. I noticed he kept checking his phone, the blue light illuminating his face in the darkness. He'd type something, wait, then check again. Each time, his expression grew more tense. "No service out here," I said, trying to make conversation. "Yeah, I noticed," he muttered, still staring at his screen. We passed a mile marker, and I calculated we were about 6 miles from Auburn. Just a few more minutes and I could drop this guy off and be done with the whole uncomfortable situation. That's when things got weird. "Actually," he said suddenly, "would you mind taking a slight detour? My buddy lives just off the next intersection. It had saved me a lot of trouble. Warning bells started going off in my head. This wasn't the plan. I'd agreed to take him to Auburn, not to some random house in the middle of nowhere. "I thought your truck broke down and you needed to get to town," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He shifted in his seat. "Yeah, but my friend can help me out with that. It's just a couple minutes off the main road." I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. "Sorry, man, I'm pretty beat. I can drop you in Auburn like we agreed." He was quiet for a moment, then leaned forward slightly. "It's right up here. Just take a right at the next intersection." The way he said it wasn't a request. It was an instruction. My heart started pounding. We were in the middle of nowhere. It was pouring rain past 2 in the morning, and this stranger was trying to direct me off my route. I slowed as we approached the intersection he'd mentioned. There was a narrow road branching off to the right, disappearing into dense trees. No street lights, no houses visible from the main road, just darkness. "It's right down there," he said, pointing. "The house with the porch light on." I couldn't see any porch light. I couldn't see anything down that road except trees and blackness. Something made me glance at his phone, which he was still clutching. The screen showed a text conversation. I couldn't read it all, but the last message sent was clear. "Coming now. Get ready." In that moment, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. This guy wasn't stranded. He wasn't looking for help. He was luring me somewhere. I slowed even more as we approached the turn, pretending I was going to comply. He visibly relaxed, thinking I was going to turn. But as we came to the intersection, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Movement in the trees, the faintest outline of figures standing just off the road, partially hidden. If I hadn't been looking specifically in that direction, I would have missed them completely. I'm not sure what happened next. Pure adrenaline took over. Instead of turning right, I slammed on the brakes. The car skidded on the wet pavement, and before my passenger could react, I reached across him, shoved the door open, and pushed him out with all my strength. He tumbled onto the road with a shout of surprise. I hit the gas before he even hit the ground, accelerating hard past the intersection. In my rearview mirror, I could see him scrambling to his feet, yelling something I couldn't hear over the engine and rain. And then I saw them, 5 men emerging from the trees where the road turned. Even through the rain and darkness, I could see they were all wearing dark clothes. One of them had something in his hand that looked like a crowbar or bat. I floored it. My tires spun on the wet asphalt before finding traction, and the car shot forward. I drove like a maniac, taking curves too fast, barely staying on the road. My hands were shaking so badly I could hardly keep control of the wheel. I kept checking the rearview mirror, terrified I'd see headlights following me, but there was only darkness. I didn't slow down until I reached the outskirts of Auburn, and even then, I didn't stop. I blew through town and kept driving all the way home, locking my doors the second I pulled into my driveway. I sat in my car for nearly an hour, jumping at every sound, before I finally worked up the courage to go inside. I called the police the next morning. They took my statement and said they'd investigate, but I could tell they were skeptical. A hitchhiker and mysterious figures in the trees during a rainstorm. It sounded far-fetched even to me, and I'd lived it. A week later, a detective called to tell me they'd found no evidence of an ambush set up. No abandoned truck, no reports of similar incidents. The case was essentially closed. But 2 weeks after that, I read a news article about a driver who'd gone missing along Route 16. His car was found abandoned near the same intersection where I'd dropped my passenger. There were signs of a struggle. The driver hasn't been found. I don't know if it's connected to what happened to me. I don't know if those men are still out there, waiting for the next person kind enough or stupid enough to stop for a hitchhiker on a rainy night. All I know is I don't drive Route 16 after dark anymore. I take the long way home, adding 40 minutes to my commute because I can't shake the feeling that if I drive that road again, they'll be waiting. I used to laugh at the stories about Disappearance Road. Now I'm just another person telling one. Story 13. I've been a trucker for 22 years now. 22 years of endless highways, cheap diners, and the kind of solitude most people would go crazy in. But I loved it, at least until last month. I've seen some weird shit on the road, don't get me wrong. Hallucinations from sleep deprivation, strange hitchhikers, even what I thought was a UFO once turned out to be military aircraft. But nothing, absolutely nothing, compares to what happened to me on I-40 heading toward Albuquerque. I was hauling steel that night. Heavy load, tight deadline, the usual pressure. I'd been pushing myself harder than I should have, probably. Had been on the road for about 14 hours with only short breaks. Not exactly regulation, but bills don't pay themselves, and my dispatch was breathing down my neck about delivery times. It was around 2:17 in the morning. I remember checking my dashboard clock right before it all started. The highway was practically empty, just darkness and the occasional pair of headlights passing the other way. My eyes were getting heavy. I was chewing gum, had the window cracked despite the cold radio blasting classic rock, all the usual tricks to stay awake. But there was something else that night, a feeling, like a weight pressing down on my chest. At first, I thought it was just anxiety about making the delivery, but it felt different, more primal, like when you're a kid and you're convinced there's something in your closet. I was just about to pull over and splash some water on my face when I saw it. A flickering neon sign maybe half a mile ahead, Red Hollow Truck Stop. I'd never seen it before, and I'd driven this stretch dozens of times. But hell, I was desperate for coffee and a proper break, so I signaled and took the exit. The place looked old, real old. Not retro in that hipster way some places do nowadays, but genuinely like it hadn't been updated since the 70s. There were 2 ancient gas pumps out front with those rounded tops you don't see anymore. The paint was peeling off the main building, and there was only one other vehicle, an old blue pickup truck parked at the far end of the lot. I pulled my rig into the lot, noticing how the gravel crunched oddly under my tires, too loud in the quiet night. I shut off the engine, and the silence that followed was thick, almost suffocating. No highway noise, which was strange considering how close we were to I-40. The open 24 hours sign buzzed and flickered, casting an unnatural red glow across the lot. I grabbed my thermos and wallet, then headed inside, already thinking about that first sip of coffee. The bell above the door gave a sad little jingle as I walked in. The place was empty, not just customer empty, but staff empty too. There was a counter with a register, a few booths with cracked vinyl seats, and a sad-looking pie case with nothing in it. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed and occasionally flickered, giving everything a sickly pale glow. "Hello?" I called out. Nothing. There was a coffee pot behind the counter, and it looked like it had been on for hours. The coffee inside had reduced to a thick, burnt sludge. A half-eaten sandwich sat on a plate beside the register, like someone had just stepped away. But it wasn't fresh. The bread had curled at the edges. That feeling of wrongness intensified. You develop instincts on the road, and everything about this place was setting off alarm bells. But I was so damn tired, and I needed to use the bathroom and maybe wash my face before getting back on the road. I was just about to leave when I heard it. An old-fashioned payphone in the corner started ringing. Not a cell phone ring, but that proper, jarring bell that payphones used to have. I nearly jumped out of my skin. I stared at it for what felt like forever. 3 rings, 4, 5. It wasn't stopping, and I don't know why. Maybe curiosity, maybe some weird compulsion. But I walked over and picked it up. "Hello?" My voice sounded strange, even to my own ears. There was silence on the line, then a sort of wet, raspy breathing, and then a voice barely above a whisper. "Don't leave. Not yet." My blood went cold. "Who is this?" I demanded. "They're coming back around. Stay where you are if you want to keep what's yours." The voice sounded old, gender indistinguishable, with a weird accent I couldn't place. "What the hell are you talking about? Who is this?" I was getting angry now, the fear morphing into frustration. "Look outside." I turned to look through the front windows, still holding the receiver. My truck, my goddamn truck, had its headlights on. I hadn't left them on. I'm certain of it. "What the—" I started to say, but the line went dead. I slammed the phone down and rushed to the door, suddenly desperate to get back to my rig. But as I reached for the handle, I saw someone or something standing just outside. A figure, barely visible in the shadows between the flickering neon lights. Tall and thin, unnaturally so, standing perfectly still. I froze. The figure didn't move, couldn't make out a face, just darkness where features should be. My hand was still on the door handle, but I couldn't bring myself to open it. Then the lights inside the truck stop went out all at once. Complete darkness except for the neon sign outside and my truck's headlights. And in that moment, in the reflection of the glass door, I saw someone standing behind me. I spun around, heart practically exploding in my chest, but there was no one there. Just darkness. When I turned back to the door, the figure outside was gone too, but something else was happening. My truck was moving, slowly rolling forward, as if someone had released the brake and put it in neutral, except the headlights were still on, and I could see clearly into the cab. There was no one in the driver's seat. Pure panic hit me then. I yanked at the door, but it wouldn't open. Locked somehow, though I hadn't seen anyone lock it. I pulled harder, rattling the entire frame, but nothing. My truck was picking up speed now, rolling toward the exit back to the highway. In desperation, I grabbed a metal napkin holder from a nearby table and smashed it against the glass door. It took 3 solid hits before the glass finally shattered. I kicked out the remaining shards and climbed through, cutting my arm in the process but barely feeling it. I sprinted toward where my truck had been, but it was too late. It was gone, and so was the blue pickup that had been parked there. In fact, the entire lot looked different, smaller, more run down, with weeds growing through larger cracks in the pavement. I turned back to look at the truck stop, and my breath caught in my throat. The building was dark, not just unlit, but abandoned. Windows boarded up, door, now with intact glass somehow, chained shut. The neon sign that had guided me in was dead, half the letters missing. I stood there, bleeding, panting, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The place looked like it had been abandoned for years, not minutes. The cold desert air bit at my skin as the reality of my situation sank in. I was stranded in the middle of nowhere in the dead of night. My phone showed no signal. Of course it didn't. I started walking, following the dirt road back toward where I thought the highway should be. It took almost an hour of walking before I reached I-40, and another half hour before a state trooper spotted me on the shoulder and pulled over. The trooper, Officer Mendez according to his nameplate, looked at me like I was crazy when I told him what happened, asked if I'd been drinking or taking anything. I don't blame him. I wouldn't have believed me, either. "Sir, there's no truck stop called Red Hollow anywhere near here," he said, checking something on his computer. "Nearest gas station is 30 miles back toward Gallup." "Then take me there," I insisted. "Take me back to where you found me walking. I'll show you." He sighed but agreed, probably just to humor me before taking me in for a psych evaluation or a drug test. We drove back, me directing him to turn off exactly where I'd exited the highway. There was nothing there, no truck stop, no building, not even a dirt road. Just desert scrub and rocks stretching out into darkness. Mendez looked at me with a mixture of suspicion and concern. "Sir, I'm going to need you to take a breathalyzer test." I passed it, of course, passed the drug test too when we got to the station. They took my statement, though I could tell no one believed a word of it. They figured I'd abandoned my truck somewhere in a moment of fatigue-induced confusion. My rig turned up 2 days later, about 100 miles east of where I'd lost it. Engine still running, fuel nearly empty. Nothing missing, nothing damaged, just relocated. No fingerprints except mine, no explanation. I've been back on the road since then. Had to be, it's how I make my living. But I avoid that stretch of I-40 like the plague now, and I never, ever drive through the night in New Mexico anymore. The thing that really gets to me, though, last week I was at a proper truck stop in Arizona, and I overheard 2 other drivers talking. One of them mentioned pulling into an old place called Red Hollow a few nights back when he was desperate for coffee. Said when he came out from the bathroom, his wallet was missing from the counter where he'd left it. When he went back later in the morning to file a complaint, there was nothing there but empty desert. The other driver laughed it off, called him crazy. But I saw the look in the first guy's eyes. He wasn't lying. And he saw the recognition in my face too. Gave me a nod that said more than words ever could. Whatever that place is, it's still out there, appearing and disappearing, taking things, sometimes small things like wallets, sometimes big things like 18-wheelers. And I can't help but wonder, what else has it taken that no one's talking about? I still hear that voice sometimes in my dreams. Don't leave, not yet. And I wake up wondering, what would have happened if I'd stayed? Story 14. I don't even know where to start with this. I've been trying to write this down for weeks now, but every time I sit at my keyboard, my hands start shaking so bad I can barely type. I'm only sharing this because I need someone, anyone, to believe me. The department psychologist thinks I'm suffering from PTSD or some kind of psychotic break. My wife keeps looking at me like I'm a stranger. But I know what I saw. I know what happened to me. I've been with the Blue Hills PD for 17 years. Never had any issues before this. Sure, I've seen some nasty car wrecks, a couple of domestics gone bad, but nothing that ever really got under my skin. We're a quiet suburban town. Most exciting thing we deal with is teenagers throwing parties when their parents are away, or the occasional shoplifter at the Safeway. It was a Wednesday night, around 11:30. I was on the late shift and had just finished my coffee at the Denny's on Route 6 when the call came in. Dispatch said there was a prowler reported at 43 Pinewood Avenue. The homeowner, Mrs. Coleman, sweet old lady, widow, lived alone with her cats, had called saying someone was walking around her property, looking in windows, standard stuff. I told dispatch I was on my way and headed over. It was mid-October, chilly but not cold yet. One of those clear nights where you can see every star. Pinewood Avenue is in one of those older neighborhoods, big oak trees lining the street, houses set back from the road, decent-sized yards, nice area, low crime. Honestly, the prowler call seemed out of place. I pulled up to Mrs. Coleman's house with my headlights off, something we do sometimes so we don't spook anyone who might be there. Rolled to a stop across the street and just observed for a minute. The house was dark except for a single light in what I guessed was the living room. Nothing seemed immediately off. That's when I saw it. A figure standing at the edge of the property line, right where her yard meets the wooded area behind the house. Tall, thin, wearing what looked like a dark hoodie. Just standing there, perfectly still, like it was watching the house. I got out of my car quietly, hand resting on my holster. "Police officer," I called out, keeping my voice firm but not too loud. "I need to speak with you." The figure turned, just slightly, like it was looking at me over its shoulder. Then it bolted, took off into the trees behind the property. I radioed in that I was in pursuit of a suspect and followed. I've chased people before, but this was different. This person moved wrong, too smooth, too fast, like they weren't quite touching the ground properly, and completely silent. No sound of footsteps, no breaking twigs, nothing. The woods behind Pinewood aren't deep, maybe a quarter-mile before they hit the back of the shopping center on Main Street, but it felt like I ran forever. My flashlight beam bounced off trees, casting weird shadows that seemed to move. The figure stayed just at the edge of my light, always visible but never close enough to catch. Then, suddenly, nothing. The figure was gone. I stopped, breathing hard, sweeping my flashlight around. Complete silence. Not even normal night sounds like crickets or the distant traffic from the highway. Just nothing. I circled back to Mrs. Coleman's house, checked all the doors and windows. Everything was secure. I knocked, and she answered in her bathrobe, clearly frightened. I did a walk-through of her house, checked the yard again, and told her to keep her doors locked. Typical stuff. Filed my report when I got back to the station and tried to forget about it. The next night, Thursday, I was back on patrol. Same shift. Around the same time, 11:45 or so, dispatch called in another prowler report. Same address, 43 Pinewood Avenue. I remember thinking it was weird, 2 nights in a row, but not impossible. Maybe our guy from last night decided to come back. I headed over, same approach as before. This time I parked a little further down the street and approached on foot. The figure was there again, same spot, same stance, like it had been waiting. "Police, don't move!" I shouted, already drawing my weapon. Something felt off, really off. The figure turned, slowly this time, and when it faced me fully, I felt my blood turn to ice. It had no face, just a blank, smooth surface where features should be, like a mannequin or a mask, but it moved with the figure. In the beam of my flashlight, it looked slightly reflective, like plastic. I'm not ashamed to admit I froze. 17 years on the force, and I froze like a rookie. Because what the hell do you do when faced with something like that? The figure took a step toward me, then another. I found my voice and ordered it to stop. It didn't. I fired a warning shot into the air. Protocol be damned, I was scared shitless. The figure didn't even flinch at the gunshot. It just kept coming, and that's when I heard it, whispering. Not from the figure, but from all around me. Multiple voices overlapping, too quiet to make out words, but definitely there. I backed up, keeping my gun trained on the figure. Hit the button on my radio to call for backup. "Dispatch, this is Officer Harris. I need immediate assistance at 43 Pinewood." A voice cut me off. Not dispatch, something else, something that made my skin crawl. "There's no need for backup, Officer Harris. We're already here." The voice came through my radio but sounded distorted, like someone speaking through static and water. I looked up from my radio and felt my heart stop. All around me, at the edges of the yard, the tree line, even on the street, figures, dozens of them, all tall, thin, all with the same blank, featureless faces, all perfectly still, watching. I ran to my patrol car. Don't judge me, you would have too. Hands shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. I looked down for a second to steady my hand, and when I looked back up, one of them was standing right in front of my car, just appeared there. No movement, no walking up, just suddenly there. I tried to start the car. Nothing happened. The engine didn't even turn over. The radio was dead too, just static when I tried to call in again. I reached for my gun, but my holster was empty. My gun was gone. I always secure my weapon, always, but it was gone, like it had never been there. The figures started moving toward the car, slow, deliberate steps. The whispering got louder. I could almost make out words now, almost, something about joining and becoming. The temperature in the car dropped so fast I could see my breath. I locked the doors, like that would help. I was trying anything at that point. My phone was dead too. Everything electronic just stopped working. One of them pressed its hand against my window. Its fingers were too long, joints bending at odd angles. The hand felt wrong, like it wasn't made of the same stuff we are. The window frosted over where it touched. Another one appeared at the passenger side, then the back windows. They were surrounding me. I couldn't breathe. The air felt thick, like trying to breathe underwater. The one at my window leaned in close, its blank face just inches from the glass. Then its head tilted like a curious dog. That simple movement was somehow the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen. It was studying me. Something grabbed my wrist, a cold, clammy hand reaching from the back seat. I never heard the back door open. Never saw anything get in. But something was in the car with me, its grip like ice on my skin. I tried to scream but couldn't make a sound. The last thing I remember is that blank face pressed against my windshield and darkness rushing in from all sides like a flood. I woke up 3 days later in the woods behind the shopping center. My uniform was filthy but otherwise intact. My badge, gun, radio, all missing. I was dehydrated, confused, and terrified. When I stumbled into the open, a woman loading groceries into her car saw me and called 911. According to everyone else, I had gone missing after responding to a call. My patrol car was found abandoned at the end of Pinewood Avenue, door open, engine cold. They'd been searching for me for days. The official report says I suffered some kind of breakdown, that the prowler calls never happened. Dispatch has no record of them. Mrs. Coleman claims she never called the police either night. My dashcam footage from both nights is completely corrupted, just static. They found no fingerprints on my car except mine. I've been on administrative leave for 2 weeks now. Mandatory sessions with the department psychologist, pills that don't help. My wife tries to understand, but how can she? I barely understand it myself. Here's the thing that keeps me up at night. I wasn't alone when I woke up in those woods. For just a moment, I saw them standing between the trees, watching me. And every night since then, I hear that whispering outside my window. Sometimes, when I look outside, I see a tall, thin figure standing under the streetlight, its blank face turned toward my house. Nobody believes me. They think the stress of the job finally got to me. But I know what I saw. I know what happened, and I know they're not done with me yet. Last night, my wife swears she heard someone calling my name from outside, and this morning I found my missing badge on our front porch. Whatever those things are, they're still out there, still watching, and I think they're getting closer. Story 15. I've been debating whether to share this for months now. Part of me wants to forget everything that happened, but I can't sleep without seeing those faces. Maybe writing this down will help. I don't expect anyone to believe me, but this is what happened to me at the Milligan house 3 months ago. I've been an officer in Brooksville for almost 7 years. It's a small town where everyone knows everyone's business, and not much happens beyond the occasional drunk and disorderly or teenage vandalism. The most interesting things in town are the stories people tell, especially about the Milligan house. For those who don't know, the Milligan family disappeared about 20 years ago, just vanished one night. Mother, father, 2 kids. Their car was still in the garage, dinner half eaten on the table. No signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play. It was like they just got up and walked into thin air. The case went cold pretty quick, and the house has been sitting empty ever since. Kids dare each other to go up and touch the door. Teenagers break in sometimes to drink or mess around. Everyone in town has some theory about what happened. Murder, suicide, witness protection, alien abduction, you name it. I never paid much attention to the rumors. It was a Tuesday night, around 11:30. I was finishing up paperwork at the station when the call came in. Mrs. Abernathy, who lives about a quarter mile from the Milligan place, reported seeing lights in the windows. Said they were moving around like someone was walking through the house with a flashlight. Dispatch asked if I could check it out. I figured it was probably just some kids, but I was glad for the break from paperwork. It had been raining earlier, and the roads were still wet as I drove out there. The Milligan house sits at the end of an old gravel road bordered by woods on 3 sides. Even in daylight, the place looks creepy, a big Victorian with peeling paint and a sagging roof. At night, with clouds covering the moon, it was downright ominous. I pulled up and immediately noticed something odd. There weren't any other cars around. Usually when kids break in, they park nearby. I radioed in my arrival and grabbed my flashlight. The air felt unusually cold for September, and something about the silence made the hair on my arms stand up. The front porch creaked under my weight as I approached the door. I called out, "Police officer, anyone inside?" No response. The door was unlocked, which wasn't surprising. The place had been broken into so many times that nobody bothered securing it anymore. Inside, the house smelled musty and damp. Water damage had warped the floorboards, and wallpaper peeled from the walls in long strips. My flashlight beam caught cobwebs in the corners and dust covering everything. I moved through the first floor methodically. Living room, dining room, kitchen. Everything was as you'd expect in an abandoned house. Old furniture covered in sheets, cabinets hanging open, rodent droppings in the corners. There was no sign anyone had been there recently. No footprints in the dust besides my own. I was about to write it off as Mrs. Abernathy's imagination when I heard it, a faint whispering sound coming from upstairs. I froze, listening. It wasn't the wind or the house settling. It sounded like someone talking very quietly, almost rhythmically. I called out again, "Police department, anyone up there needs to come down now." The whispering stopped for a moment, then continued. "I should have called for backup then. That's procedure." but I didn't want to look like an idiot calling for help because of some whispers in an empty house. So I headed upstairs, one hand on my gun, the other holding my flashlight. The staircase groaned with each step. Upstairs was a long hallway with 4 doors, probably bedrooms and a bathroom. The whispering seemed to be coming from the last door on the right. As I got closer, I could make out what sounded like multiple voices, though I couldn't understand what they were saying. I pushed the door open slowly. What I saw made me stop cold. In the center of what must have been a child's bedroom was a circle of candles, maybe 7 or 8 of them, all lit and flickering. In the middle of the circle sat an old tape recorder, the kind with actual cassette tapes. The whispers were coming from it. I approached cautiously, sweeping my flashlight around the room. There was no sign of anyone else there. The tape recorder looked ancient, covered in dust except for fingerprints on the play button. I knelt down and hit stop. The whispering cut off, and in that instant of silence, the bedroom door slammed shut behind me with enough force to rattle the windows. I spun around, drawing my gun. "Who's there?" I shouted, but my voice sounded muffled, like the air had suddenly become thick. The temperature in the room dropped dramatically. I could see my breath clouding in front of my face. I holstered my weapon and tried the door. It wouldn't budge, like something was holding it from the other side. I grabbed my radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Reynolds. I need backup at the Milligan house immediately." Instead of a response, the radio emitted a high-pitched squeal that made me wince. Then it went dead. I tried my cell phone, no signal. That's when I heard it. A soft voice directly behind me. "You shouldn't have come here, officer. They never left. They're still here, waiting." I whirled around, but there was no one there. Just the circle of candles which seemed to be burning lower now, the flames barely visible. The tape recorder started running again, though I hadn't touched it. My flashlight began to flicker, the beam growing weaker. In those flashes of dimming light, I saw them, standing against the walls, forming a circle around me, pale faces with hollow, empty eye sockets. 2 adults and 2 children, the Milligan family. They weren't quite solid. I could see the peeling wallpaper through their forms, but they were definitely there, watching me with those horrible empty eyes. The mother's mouth moved, forming words I couldn't hear. I'm not ashamed to admit I panicked. I slammed my shoulder against the door again and again until the rotting wood finally gave way. I stumbled into the hallway, my flashlight barely working now. Behind me, the whispers grew louder, more urgent. I ran for the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. About halfway down, my foot went through a weak board. I fell hard, twisting my ankle, but adrenaline kept me moving. I limped across the entrance hall and burst out the front door into the cool night air. My patrol car sat where I'd left it, and I've never been so happy to see anything in my life. I limped toward it, fumbling for my keys. That's when I noticed them, standing at the edge of the trees surrounding the property. The Milligan family watching me silently. The father pointed at me, while the mother's mouth continued to move without sound. I jumped into my car and locked the doors, hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. I tried the radio again, nothing but static punctuated by what sounded like distant, distorted voices. My cell phone screen showed nothing but snow, like an old TV with no signal. When I looked up, a woman was standing directly in front of my car. Not the mother, someone different. Her skin was gray, her hair hanging in wet clumps around her face. Her eyes were completely black and her mouth moved silently, forming words I somehow understood without hearing. "You'll stay with us now." I turned the key and nothing happened. The engine wouldn't start. I tried again and again, pumping the gas pedal frantically. The woman took a step toward the car, placing her hand on the hood. The metal began to frost over where she touched it. I don't remember much after that. I must have blacked out from sheer terror. The next thing I knew, it was morning, and I was sitting in my locked patrol car with the engine cold. The Milligan house stood silent in the daylight, looking decrepit but ordinary. There was no sign of candles, no sign of the family, no sign of the woman. My radio and phone worked perfectly. When I called in, they told me they'd been trying to reach me all night. According to dispatch, I'd radioed in that I was checking the house and then gone silent for 7 hours. I reported what happened, but I could tell nobody believed me. They found no evidence of candles or a tape recorder in the house. There were no footprints besides mine. The official report says I probably fell asleep in my car while on duty. I was suspended for 2 weeks. I've requested a transfer to another department. I can't stay in Brooksville anymore. Sometimes at night, I still hear those whispers, like they're coming from inside my walls. My phone occasionally displays static for a few seconds before returning to normal, and twice now, I've glimpsed a pale face with hollow eyes reflected in my bathroom mirror, standing behind me. I don't know what happened to the Milligan family 20 years ago, but I know they never left that house. And sometimes I wonder if a part of me is still there too, trapped in that room with them, waiting for the next person who comes looking. Story 16. I've never told this story online before, but I need to get it off my chest. It happened last Halloween, and I still can't sleep properly because of it. My therapist says writing about it might help, so here goes. I grew up in Willow Creek, this tiny countryside town where nothing ever happens. Well, almost nothing. There's this house, the Grayson House, sitting on top of Hollow Hill just outside town. Everyone knows about it, but nobody talks about it, at least not directly. It's been empty for over 50 years, ever since the Grayson family disappeared during some massive storm back in the day. They literally vanished, leaving everything behind. Clothes, furniture, food on the table, the works. Super creepy stuff. Growing up, we'd hear whispers about people who tried moving in afterward. They'd all leave within days, talking about weird noises at night, feeling cold hands touching them while they slept, and shadows moving by themselves. A couple people even had these freaky accidents after staying there. One guy fell down the stairs and broke his neck. Another had a heart attack at 30. Eventually, everyone just agreed to leave the place alone. So, of course, being the idiot teenagers we were, my friends and I decided it would be fun to spend Halloween night there. There were 4 of us, me, Jack, my girlfriend Mia, and our friends Tom and Lucy. We'd been friends since middle school, and spending the night in Grayson House seemed like the ultimate test of courage. The day of Halloween, we packed our sleeping bags, some snacks, flashlights, and a few candles. My mom thought we were camping at Tom's backyard. Sorry, Mom. We waited until it was dark, parked about half a mile away, and walked the rest of the way so nobody would see our car. I'll never forget that first moment we saw the house in the moonlight. There was a full moon that night, which made everything worse somehow. The house looked like a giant skull with the windows as empty eye sockets, just staring down at us. The paint was peeling off in these long strips that looked like tears running down its face. Even from outside, it felt wrong, like it was watching us. The front gate made this awful screeching noise when we pushed it open. The yard was overgrown with weeds that came up to our knees, and there were these creepy stone angels covered in moss. One of them was missing its head. "We can still back out," Mia whispered, grabbing my hand. But of course we didn't. I was trying to act all brave, and Tom was already heading up the porch steps. The wood creaked under our weight, and I swear to God it sounded like someone moaning. The front door was locked, but one of the side windows was broken. Tom climbed through first, then helped the rest of us in. The smell hit me immediately. This musty, moldy odor mixed with something else I couldn't place. Something sickly sweet, like rotting fruit. Our flashlight beams cut through thick dust clouds. The place was exactly what you'd expect from a 50-year-old abandoned house. Cobwebs everywhere, furniture covered in sheets, old picture frames on the walls with the photos removed. But something felt off about it all. The furniture was arranged like someone still lived there, waiting to come back. There was even an old newspaper on the coffee table dated October 30th, 1972, the day before the Graysons disappeared. We set up our sleeping bags in what used to be the living room. There was this massive fireplace that Tom managed to get working, and we sat around telling ghost stories like we weren't already freaking ourselves out enough. The wind kept howling through the broken windows, making these whistling sounds that sometimes sounded like words. Around midnight, we decided to explore the house. We split into pairs. me with Mia and Tom with Lucy. Mia and I took the basement while Tom and Lucy went upstairs. The basement was the worst part. The stairs creaked with every step, and it was at least 10 degrees colder down there than the rest of the house. Our flashlights kept flickering, which Mia said was probably just the batteries, but it felt deliberate somehow. There wasn't much down there, just some old furniture, boxes of junk, and a rusty water heater. But then we found this room at the very back. It was tiny, with no windows, and the only thing in it was this cracked mirror hanging on the wall. The crack formed this jagged line right through the middle, like a lightning bolt. "Let's take a picture," Mia said, pulling out her phone. That's when it happened. As she raised her phone to take the picture, I saw something in the mirror that made my blood freeze. Behind our reflections was the figure of a man, just standing there watching us. He was tall and thin, wearing old-fashioned clothes, and his face was wrong, like it was melting. I spun around so fast I almost fell, but there was nobody there. "What's wrong?" Mia asked, looking concerned. I couldn't speak. I just pointed at the mirror, but when we looked back, the figure was gone. "You're freaking yourself out," she said, but I could tell she was scared too. We practically ran back upstairs and found Tom and Lucy already in the living room. They looked pale. "Did you guys see anything weird?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Lucy nodded, her hands shaking. "We found the nursery upstairs. There was still a crib there with toys and everything, and I saw something in the mirror, a shadow that didn't match anything in the room." We all just sat there for a minute, not saying anything. Then Tom cleared his throat. "So, I brought something," he said, reaching into his backpack. He pulled out a Ouija board. "No way," Mia said immediately. "Are you insane?" "Come on, it's Halloween," Tom argued. "We came here for the full experience, right?" I should have sided with Mia. I should have grabbed our stuff and left right then, but I didn't. Part of me wanted to know if what I'd seen was real. We set up the board on the floor and lit candles around us. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the windows like someone was trying to get in. We all put our fingers on the planchette, and Tom asked if anyone was there. Nothing happened at first. We were about to give up when the planchette suddenly moved. It wasn't like someone was pushing it. It felt like it was pulling our fingers along with it. Greyson. "You spelled it wrong," Lucy whispered. "The family. Name is Grayson with an A." The planchette moved again. N-O. Then it started moving faster. Trapped. "Who's trapped?" Tom asked, his voice cracking. D-I-E. Right when it spelled that last letter, every candle we'd lit went out at once. Not like they were blown out. They just extinguished, all at the same time. The room went pitch black except for our flashlights, which were starting to dim. Then we heard it. Footsteps. Slow, heavy footsteps coming down the hallway toward the living room. They sounded wet, like someone walking in soaked shoes. "This isn't funny," Mia whispered, gripping my arm so tight it hurt. But we all knew it wasn't one of us. We were all right there, huddled together on the floor. The footsteps stopped right outside the doorway to the living room. There was this breathing sound, ragged and wheezing. My flashlight beam caught something in the doorway just for a split second, a tall figure dripping with what looked like water or blood. Then it was gone. We grabbed our stuff and ran for the front door. Tom reached it first and yanked on the handle, but it wouldn't budge. He threw his whole body against it, but it was like it had been sealed shut. "The kitchen door!" Lucy screamed. We ran through the dining room into the kitchen. The whole time I felt like something was right behind us, breathing down our necks. The kitchen door was unlocked, thank God, and we burst outside into the cold night air. We didn't stop running until we reached the car. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. As we drove away, I swear I heard laughter carried on the wind, high-pitched and manic, like someone who'd lost their mind. None of us said a word the whole drive back to town. We ended up crashing at Tom's place since his parents were away. None of us wanted to be alone. The next morning, we went to Sheriff Davis and told him everything. He just sighed and said, "Halloween pranks getting out of hand again." He thought we were making it up. or that we'd scared ourselves. He did agree to go back to the house with us, though. In daylight, the place looked different, still creepy, but less menacing somehow. The sheriff walked through every room while we waited outside. No way we were going back in. He came out looking annoyed. "There's nothing here, kids. Just an old empty house. The doors all work fine, and there's no sign anyone's been here in years besides you four." He didn't believe us. Nobody did. But we know what we experienced. The weird thing is, when we got home that day and looked through our phones, all the pictures we'd taken inside the house were corrupted. Just black screens with these weird light streaks across them. All except one, a photo Mia had taken of us in the living room before we used the Ouija board. In the background, you can just make out a figure standing in the hallway doorway. None of us were standing there when the picture was taken. I've spent months researching the Grayson family since that night. Turns out, they weren't even called Grayson. They were the Graysons, with an E. That detail got lost over the years as the story was passed down. And they didn't just disappear during a storm. According to old newspaper articles I found at the town library, there was an investigation. The police suspected the father, Edward Grayson, had killed his wife and children before killing himself, but they never found the bodies. I still can't sleep well. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night feeling cold hands on my face. Mia says the same thing happens to her. Tom and Lucy won't even talk about that night anymore. The Grayson house is still standing on Hollow Hill. Sometimes when I drive past, I swear I can see someone watching from the upstairs window, waiting. Story 17. I've been a police officer in this town for 6 years now. I'm not the type to get spooked easily. You can't be in this job. I've seen domestic violence scenes that would make your stomach turn, fatal car accidents, and even a few homicides. But nothing in my training prepared me for what happened at the old Hillcrest station 3 nights ago. Everyone in the department knows about Hillcrest. It's this massive brick building at the edge of town that's been abandoned since 2005 after they built our current headquarters downtown. The place has been sitting there rotting for almost 20 years. I'd heard all the stories from the older officers, weird noises, equipment turning on by itself, even claims about officers seeing things in the windows at night. I always rolled my eyes, just veterans trying to scare the rookies, I thought. I was working night shift alone. It was a Tuesday night, quiet as hell. Around 1:30 in the morning, I got a call from dispatch about suspicious activity at Hillcrest. Apparently, someone driving by reported seeing flashlights moving inside the building. Probably just teenagers, I figured. The place is a magnet for local kids looking for thrills. It was raining that night. Not a heavy downpour, but one of those steady, miserable drizzles that soaks you through. I remember pulling up to Hillcrest and sitting in my patrol car for a minute, just staring at the building. Even in the dark, there was something imposing about it. 4 stories of red brick with these tall, narrow windows that reminded me of eyes watching you. The chain-link fence around the property had a gate that was supposed to be padlocked. It wasn't. It was standing wide open, which was my first red flag. I called in my position and said I was going to check the premises. I remember dispatch asking if I wanted backup. I said no. Stupid, stupid decision. I approached the main entrance with my flashlight in one hand and my other hand resting on my holstered weapon. The front door was ajar, about 3 inches open. Another red flag. I announced myself loudly. "Police officer, identify yourself," the usual protocol. Nothing but silence. When I pushed the door open, the hinges made this awful screeching sound that echoed through the building. The lobby was exactly what you'd expect from an abandoned police station. Reception desk covered in dust, old bulletin boards with faded notices still pinned to them, dead plants in the corners that were nothing but dried sticks in pots. The air inside was thick, not just dusty, but heavy somehow. It smelled like mold and wet paper, and something else I couldn't identify. Kind of metallic, almost like old pennies. The floor was covered in debris. Fallen ceiling tiles, paperwork, broken furniture. My footsteps crunched no matter how carefully I tried to walk. I swept my flashlight across the lobby and down the main corridor. No sign of anyone, no fresh footprints in the dust besides my own. I was starting to think the call was bogus when I heard it. A tapping sound, rhythmic, deliberate, tap, 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 coming from somewhere deeper in the building. I followed the sound down the main corridor, past what used to be the bullpen where the officers' desks were. Most of the desks were still there, some with old computer monitors sitting on them like prehistoric artifacts. Papers were scattered everywhere, case files, reports, forms. It was like everyone had just up and left in the middle of their workday. The tapping led me to a hallway I recognized from the building layout as leading to the interrogation rooms. It was getting louder. Tap, tap, tap. It had a mechanical quality to it, not like someone knocking on a surface, but more like a machine operating. The door to interrogation room 3 was closed. The tapping was definitely coming from inside. I stood outside for a moment, listening. Just that steady tapping. No voices, no movement. I announced myself again, then turned the handle and pushed the door open. The interrogation room was small, maybe 10 by 12 feet. Table in the center, 2 chairs. One-way mirror on the wall. Pretty standard. But what wasn't standard was the tape recorder sitting on the table. It was an old reel-to-reel model, and the reels were turning. The tapping I'd heard was the sound of the tape hitting a loose component inside the machine with each rotation. I stood frozen in the doorway. The tape recorder was running in an abandoned building with no power. I approached it slowly, my flashlight beam fixed on it. The reels kept turning, that steady tap, tap, tap continuing. There was no cord connecting it to an outlet, no batteries that I could see, but it was running. I reached out and pressed the stop button. The reels slowed and stopped. The tapping ceased, and in that moment, the overhead lights in the room flickered on for maybe half a second before going dark again. My heart nearly stopped. The building had been disconnected from the power grid for years. Those lights couldn't have turned on. It was impossible. And then I heard it. A whisper, right behind me. "Help me." I spun around so fast I nearly fell, sweeping my flashlight across the empty room. There was nobody there, just me and that damn tape recorder. But I'd heard it clear as day. A woman's voice, soft but urgent. "Help me." "Who's there?" I called out, my own voice sounding strained even to my ears. "This is Officer Mitchell with the police department. Show yourself." Silence. I backed toward the door, unwilling to turn my back on the room. As I reached the doorway, I heard the whisper again, this time from the hallway. "Please, help me." I whipped around, pointing my flashlight down the corridor, and that's when I saw it. A figure at the far end of the hall, just for a second, silhouetted against the darkness. It looked like a woman in what might have been an old-style police uniform. But before I could be sure, it vanished around the corner. "Stop! Police!" I shouted, moving toward where I'd seen the figure. But as I walked down the hallway, my flashlight began to flicker. Not like it was dying, more like something was interfering with it. The beam would dim, then brighten, then dim again. The whispers started again, but now they seemed to be coming from everywhere. Multiple voices, some louder than others, all saying variations of the same thing. "Help me. Don't leave us here. Please help." I reached the end of the corridor where I'd seen the figure turn. It led to a stairwell going down to the basement. The door to the stairs was open, and the whispers seemed to be coming from below. There was no way in hell I was going down there alone. I started backing up, intending to retreat to my car and call for backup. That's when my flashlight died completely. I was plunged into darkness so absolute I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. And in that darkness, I felt something cold brush against my cheek, like fingers, but not quite solid. I'm not ashamed to admit I ran. I turned and sprinted back the way I'd come, using the wall to guide me through the darkness. The whispers followed me, growing louder and more desperate. I could swear I heard footsteps behind me, multiple sets, running, but somehow not quite touching the ground. I burst out of the front entrance and nearly collided with Officer Peterson, who was just getting out of his patrol car. Apparently, dispatch had sent backup anyway after I didn't respond to their radio checks. I hadn't even heard them calling me. Peterson took one look at my face and drew his weapon. What happened? Are there suspects inside? I was breathing too hard to speak properly. I just shook my head and pointed at the building. Peterson radioed for additional units, and within minutes, 4 more patrol cars had arrived. They searched the building top to bottom while I sat in my car trying to stop shaking. They found nothing. No tape recorder in interrogation room 3. No signs that anyone had been in the building besides me. And according to Peterson, the building's electrical panels had been removed years ago. There was literally no way those lights could have flickered on. The worst part came when I was driving home after my shift ended. I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, convinced someone was sitting in my back seat. Every time I looked, there was nothing there. But the moment I'd look back at the road, I'd see movement in my peripheral vision. When I got home, I checked every room, every closet, under my bed, everywhere. I even left all the lights on when I finally lay down to try to sleep. I must have dozed off eventually because I woke up suddenly at exactly 3:15 according to my bedside clock. The power was out in my apartment and my bedroom was freezing cold. And there, at the foot of my bed, I saw her clearly for the first time. A woman in an old police uniform, her face pale and drawn, dark circles under her eyes. She was semi-transparent, like a projection, but I could see enough detail to notice a name tag, Officer J. Collins. She didn't speak, but I heard her voice in my head. "There are others still trapped there. You have to help us." Then she was gone, and my lights flickered back on. I've done some research since then. Turns out an Officer Janet Collins went missing from Hillcrest Station in 1978. They never found her body. The case went cold decades ago. I called in sick yesterday and today. I can't bring myself to tell anyone at the department what I saw. They'd think I was having a mental breakdown. Maybe I am. But every time I close my eyes, I see Officer Collins' face. And every night since, I've woken up at exactly 3:15 in the morning, my apartment ice cold. I don't know what to do. I don't know if what I experienced was real or if I'm losing my mind. But I know one thing for certain. Whatever is in that old station didn't stay there. It followed me home, and I don't think it's going to leave until I do what it's asking. I'm writing this down because I'm going back to Hillcrest tonight, alone. If something happens to me, at least someone will know why. Story 18. I've been sitting in front of my laptop for hours trying to figure out how to write this down. My hands are still shaking whenever I think about what happened on that cruise. It's been 3 weeks since I got back to New York, and I still wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I can hear that tapping sound coming from my apartment walls. Let me start from the beginning. I'm a photographer, or I was, before I took an extended leave of absence after everything. After Kevin broke off our 5-year relationship and my boss at the magazine kept piling on impossible deadlines, I was at my breaking point. My friend Jess suggested I use some of my savings to get the hell away from everything for a while. So I booked a last-minute Caribbean cruise on the SS Obsidian, sailing from New Orleans. 7 days of sunshine, drinks with little umbrellas, and no responsibilities seemed perfect. God, I wish I'd Googled that ship before booking. The Obsidian looked impressive from the outside, sleek black hull, towering 14 decks high. The boarding process in New Orleans went smoothly. My cabin was on deck 7, midship, a standard room with a small balcony. Nothing special, but comfortable enough. I remember thinking how peaceful it would be, just me and the ocean. The first day was actually great. I spent it exploring the ship, taking photos of the various amenities, drinking overpriced cocktails, and letting the sun warm my skin by the pool. I remember feeling hopeful, thinking maybe this trip would help reset everything. That night I slept like the dead, probably from the exhaustion of travel and the 3 Mai Tais I'd had after dinner. But the second night, that's when everything changed. I woke up around 2 in the morning to a tapping sound. At first, I thought it was just the ship creaking. Normal. Boat sounds, right? But as I became more alert, I realized it was too rhythmic. Tap, 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 pause. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the wall to the right of my bed, the one that would connect to the next cabin over. I tried to ignore it, pulling my pillow over my head, but it kept going. After about 20 minutes, I got annoyed enough to get up. I put my ear against the wall, and the tapping was definitely coming from the other side. I knocked back, not too loud, just a quick response to let whoever it was know they were keeping me up. The tapping stopped immediately. I waited, standing there in the dark in my pajamas, but nothing. Satisfied, I went back to bed and eventually fell asleep. The next morning at breakfast, I asked the server about the cabins next to mine. She looked confused and checked something on her tablet. "There's no cabin directly adjacent to yours on that side, ma'am. There's a utility space there." I must have looked skeptical because she showed me the ship's layout on her tablet. She was right. My cabin bordered a narrow maintenance corridor, not another guest room. I figured maybe the sound had traveled from somewhere else, or I'd been half dreaming. No big deal. Later that day, while getting coffee at one of the cafes on Deck 9, I overheard a conversation between two older women. The gray-haired one was saying, "And Marcia swears she saw someone in her bathroom mirror who wasn't there when she turned around. Old ship playing tricks." Her friend leaned in. "Did you hear about the missing passenger? The crew is being hush-hush, but my husband overheard security talking. Someone from Deck 5 didn't show up for their scheduled excursion this morning, and they can't find them anywhere." I felt a chill despite the warm Caribbean air. Missing passengers on cruise ships aren't unheard of, but combined with the strange tapping and that woman's mirror story, I shook it off. Coincidences and gossip, that's all. That evening I had dinner alone, then attended a comedy show in the main theater. I was tired by 11 and headed back to my cabin. As I walked down the long corridor, I noticed how the lights seemed dimmer than the night before, creating shadows in the corners. The hallway felt colder too, which was odd since we were in the tropics. I took a quick shower and got into bed with my Kindle. Around midnight, just as I was getting sleepy, it started again. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, tap. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered, putting down my e-reader. I pressed my ear to the wall again. The tapping continued, but this time, I heard something else. A voice, faint, like a whisper, but definitely there. "Help, please, help us." I jerked away from the wall so fast I nearly fell over. My heart was hammering in my chest. I stood frozen in the middle of my cabin for what felt like forever, just staring at that wall. The tapping had stopped, and I couldn't hear the voice anymore. I told myself I was imagining things. The stress from work and my breakup was making me hear things that weren't there. Still, I didn't sleep much that night, keeping one eye on that wall until sunrise finally came. By day 3, the atmosphere on the ship had changed. People were talking in hushed voices at breakfast. I overheard snippets. Saw a man in old-fashioned clothes just disappear into a wall. Crying coming from the empty theater at 3 a.m. Lights flickering in patterns like someone's trying to send a message. I struck up a conversation with a family at the next table. The mother, Lisa, told me her 10-year-old daughter had been asking about the wet lady who kept appearing in their bathroom. When I asked for details, she said her daughter described a woman in soaking wet clothes with sad, empty eyes who would stand in the corner watching her. "Kids and their imaginations," Lisa laughed, but it didn't reach her eyes. That afternoon, the captain made an announcement that we were experiencing minor electrical issues that maintenance was addressing. He assured us it wouldn't affect our journey or scheduled stops, but I noticed more crew members hurrying around, speaking urgently into radios, and certain areas of the ship being roped off without explanation. Someone at the pool mentioned we were now entering the region known as the Bermuda Triangle. An older man nearby scoffed, saying it was all superstition, but then lowered his voice to add, "Though this ship does have a history, built using materials from the Meridian Queen that vanished in these waters back in 1973. Never should have done that. Bad luck to use the bones of a doomed vessel." That night, I couldn't bring myself to go back to my cabin until absolutely necessary. I stayed at the ship's 24-hour cafe until almost 2 in the morning, nursing cups of tea and scrolling through my phone. A group of crew members came in looking exhausted. I overheard one say, "That's 3 now, 3 passengers just gone." Eventually, I couldn't delay any longer. I needed sleep, and I couldn't spend the night in the cafe. The walk back to my cabin felt endless. The ship seemed to creak more than usual, the corridors emptier, the shadows deeper. Inside my cabin, I turned on every light and the TV for background noise. I was determined to stay awake, but exhaustion eventually won out. I dozed off sometime after 3. The tapping woke me, louder this time, more urgent. Tap, 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 tap. No pause, just continuous, desperate tapping. "Stop it!" I shouted at the wall. "There's nobody there. This isn't funny." The tapping stopped for a moment. Then, clear as day, a woman's voice came through the wall. "They're taking us, one by one. You need to get off this ship." I scrambled out of bed, grabbing my phone to use as a flashlight. The digital clock read 4:17 a.m. The ship felt like it was moving differently. A strange sideways motion that didn't feel like normal. Waves. I don't know what possessed me, but I put on shoes and a sweater over my pajamas and went out into the corridor. It was deserted and dimly lit. The emergency lights were on instead of the regular ones, casting everything in an eerie red glow. I followed the wall where the tapping had come from, looking for a door to the maintenance corridor the server had mentioned. At the end of the hallway, I found it, an unmarked door with a crew-only sign. I hesitated, hand on the door handle. This was insane. I should go back to my room, or to reception, or anywhere else. But then I heard it again. That tapping, but fainter, coming from behind the door. I tried the handle. Locked, of course. But as I turned to leave, the door clicked and swung open about an inch on its own. The darkness beyond seemed absolute. "Hello," I called softly. "Is someone there?" No answer, but the door opened a little wider. Using my phone's flashlight, I peered inside. It was indeed a narrow maintenance corridor with pipes running along the ceiling and walls. It smelled musty and damp, like it hadn't been used in years. I stepped inside, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The corridor extended about 30 feet and ended in another door. Halfway down, there was a section of wall that looked wrong, newer than the rest, like it had been recently patched. As I approached that section, the temperature dropped dramatically. I could see my breath clouding in front of me. My phone's flashlight began to flicker. "Is anyone here?" I whispered, touching the patched wall. It felt ice cold and wet. My fingers came away with a dark smudge that looked black in the dim light. That's when I saw her, standing at the end of the corridor, in front of the other door. A woman in what might have once been a white dress, now soaked through and discolored with something dark. Her hair hung in wet ropes around a face that was wrong. Her features seemed sunken, her eyes too dark and too deep. Water pooled at her feet, but it was too dark to be just water. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice gurgling like she was speaking through liquid. "None of us should." I was frozen in place, unable to scream, unable to run. She took a step toward me, leaving a wet footprint that seemed to glisten blackly in my faltering flashlight beam. "They're bringing it back," she said. "With everyone they take. The Meridian Queen is rising again, and we're all going down with it." She was closer now, though I hadn't seen her move. Close enough that I could smell the rotting seaweed odor coming from her clothes, see the small barnacles clinging to her pale skin. Just as her cold, wet hand reached for my arm, the door behind me burst open. A crew member, security, judging by his uniform, grabbed me and pulled me back into the corridor. "What the hell are you doing in here?" he demanded, his face pale and sweaty despite his angry tone. "This area is restricted. There's a woman," I started to explain, pointing back down the corridor, but when I looked, there was nothing there. Just the empty hallway. though I could have sworn there was a wet footprint glistening on the floor. "You need to return to your cabin immediately," the security officer said, almost pushing me out. "There have been incidents with passengers wandering into unauthorized areas. Please stay in your cabin until morning announcements." He escorted me back to my room, standing outside until I closed and locked the door. I sat on the edge of my bed, shaking uncontrollably, until sunrise. At 7 a.m., the captain's voice came over the intercom. He announced that due to significant mechanical issues, we would be returning to New Orleans immediately. All scheduled ports of call were canceled. Compensation would be provided. The passengers were in an uproar. During breakfast, rumors were flying. 4 passengers missing now. A crew member found unconscious in the engine room, babbling about them coming through the walls. A child on deck 4 who kept drawing pictures of people underwater, with the same woman I'd seen in the corridor watching them from the corner. For the next 2 days, as we headed back to New Orleans, the ship felt like a prison. The crew instituted a curfew, claiming it was for passenger safety during the mechanical repairs. Security patrols roamed the corridors at night. More sections of the ship were closed off without explanation. The tapping continued in my room each night, but I didn't investigate again. I pushed my luggage against that wall and tried to drown out the sounds with TV and music. Sometimes in the quiet moments when my playlist ended, or between episodes, I could hear whispers. Multiple voices now, not just the woman's. "It's hungry," they would say. "The triangle is hungry, and the queen wants her bones back." We docked in New Orleans a day and a half ago. As we disembarked, I noticed armed Coast Guard personnel boarding. A group of serious-looking men and women in plain clothes were interviewing crew members on the dock. I overheard one passenger asking a Port Authority officer what was happening. "Routine inspection," he said, not meeting anyone's eyes. I grabbed a taxi and headed straight to the airport, booking the first flight back to New York. I've been home for 3 weeks now, trying to convince myself it was all stress and exhaustion playing tricks on my mind. But last night I was editing some photos I'd taken on the ship, harmless daytime shots of the pool deck and restaurants. In one image of the sunset from my balcony, there's a reflection in the glass railing. A woman in a wet white dress standing right behind me. And on my bedroom wall this morning, I found a damp, dark handprint that smells like seawater and decay. I don't know what happened on that ship. I don't know what's happening to me now, but I know the SS Obsidian was never just a cruise ship, and whatever came back with me isn't going to let me forget what I saw.